Hi guys. Tonight we step through time, through mist and moonlight, into a place where the wind howls against high stone walls and frost laces every window pane. You stand before a medieval castle, its towers piercing the star-dusted sky, its torches guttering like exhausted fireflies. Inside, nobles sleep behind curtains of velvet and wool, or at least they try, because when the night air drops below freezing, even royalty can shiver in their sheets. You probably wouldn't survive this chill without at least 3 layers of fur, a roaring hearth, and perhaps a loyal servant or two to keep the embers alive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights. You trudge across the drawbridge as it creaks beneath your boots. Each plank groans softly, dusted with frost that crunches underfoot. The air tastes of iron, and the moat below is more ice than water. The guards at the gatehouse huddle around a brazier, faces hidden beneath helms, their breath clouding in ghostly bursts. Inside the keep, the air is only marginally warmer. Stone doesn't hold heat, it drinks it. You feel that truth immediately, as the cold seems to seep through your soles and coil around your ankles. Up in the great hall, the ceiling disappears into shadow. A fire crackles in the massive hearth, but its warmth barely stretches beyond a few paces. You think of the princess who lives here, how her long gowns whisper across the floor as she moves, how her jewels glint even in low light. Yet she too must face the same enemy you do now, the creeping, relentless chill of medieval winter. Historians still debate whether most castles were truly comfortable in winter. Some argue that noble families abandoned their fortresses during the harshest months, retreating to smaller, cozier manors or urban residences. Others claim the great halls remained alive all year round, buzzing with servants, guards, and court life, no matter how cold. But either way, a winter night inside one of these massive stone fortresses was not for the faint of heart. You pass through an archway into the inner courtyard, where a fountain stands frozen mid-flow, an elegant sculpture of ice. The torches flicker in the wind, casting trembling shadows across the walls. The smell of smoke and damp wool hangs in the air. Somewhere above, a window slams shut against a gust, and you imagine the princess inside, pulling her cloak tighter, wishing the world would stop breathing frost for just one night. Her room lies in the upper, keep a private chamber overlooking the snow-white fields. Getting there means climbing narrow spiral staircases where each stone step is colder than the last. The air grows thinner, drier, and somehow lonelier. At last you reach the heavy oaken door carved with lilies and lions. Inside, the chamber glows faintly with candlelight. It is beautiful in its austerity. Thick drapes hang from iron rods, shielding the small windows from drafts. A canopy bed stands in the center, its posts carved like twisting vines. A fur-lined coverlet gleams in the soft light. Yet beneath that luxury, the same truth lingers. This place was built for defense, not comfort. The princess's chamber is essentially a tower room wrapped in centuries of frost. A mainstream historical fact is that most medieval castles in northern Europe were built from limestone or granite materials, excellent for fortification, but dreadful for warmth. Heat dissipated almost instantly, even from blazing hearths. Some rooms were built with massive fireplaces large enough to roast a deer, yet even then, the warmth clung close to the flames and vanished into the night. You pause to imagine her nightly routine. A maid brings in a basin of warm water, steam curling in the candlelight. Another adjusts the curtains around the bed, while a third carries in the bed warmer, a metal pan filled with glowing coals, its lid perforated like lace. The servant slides it between the sheets, moving it in slow circles to chase out the cold. You can almost smell the faint tang of hot iron and hear the hiss as heat meets damp linen. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some noblewomen believed placing a warm hen beneath the bed kept the air mild through the night. It's absurd and charming all at once. Imagine the soft clucking from beneath royal silks. A few even tucked small dogs into the covers, both for warmth and company. The medieval world had no shortage of curious comforts. The princess removes her jewelry, one piece at a time, as frost blooms on the window glass. Her breath clouds the mirror. Outside, wolves cry across the moor, their voices threading through the cold like distant bells. She shivers, but not from fear, from the sheer immensity of winter pressing against her walls. Some scholars question how these royal women truly experienced such nights. Were they pampered beyond measure, or quietly enduring the same hardships as their servants? Records are sparse. A few letters survive, written in elegant script, describing nights so bitter that sleep fled from me as the moon turned pale. Others are silent, leaving only the imagination to fill the gaps. You wander closer to the window. The shutters are thick but not airtight. A sliver of wind sighs through, cool and persistent. In the corner, a brazier glows red, its coals pulsing like a quiet heartbeat. The princess's cat curls beside it, eyes half closed. The firelight dances over the floor, revealing the uneven texture of the stone centuries of wear beneath polished slippers. You notice how everything in this chamber has a purpose. The thick rugs muffle the sound of footsteps and trap precious warmth. The canopy bed isn't mere decoration, it serves to create a smaller, warmer microclimate, especially when curtains are drawn tight. Even the arrangement of furniture helps direct the faint warmth of the hearth toward the bed. As you settle into this world, time feels heavy. The castle creaks, sighs, and settles around you. Somewhere below, the great hall's fire crackles louder, echoing through the stairwell. Servants whisper, doors thud softly, and the wind hums through arrow slits. The princess lies back beneath her furs, her face illuminated by the last flicker of the candle. Her eyelids droop, her hand resting upon embroidered sheets that smell faintly of lavender and smoke. And you, standing there unseen, begin to feel the same pull of sleep. The stone walls may be cold, but the rhythm of life here is steady, unbroken. Winter will not relent, but neither will she. The night belongs to endurance, and to dreams that bloom even in the frost. The wind shifts again as you stand in that tall, echoing chamber, and it sounds as if the castle itself sighs. The flames in the hearth bow low, nearly extinguished by a draught slipping in through unseen cracks. That, you realize, is the true nature of a medieval castle. It doesn't keep the cold out, it only slows its advance. The walls are thick, the doors are heavy, but air is stubborn, sneaking in like a gossip through every keyhole and hinge. As you move toward the window, your fingertips brush the stone. It feels damp cold in a way that doesn't just touch your skin but sinks into your bones. The princess's chamber might be filled with silks and fur, but it's also a vault of chill. When the wind howls outside, it finds its way in through arrow slits, those narrow vertical gaps designed for archers, not for comfort. The same architectural brilliance that kept enemies out ensured that warmth escaped almost immediately. Historians still debate whether castles ever truly lost their chill. Some suggest that heavy tapestries and wooden paneling eventually improved insulation, while others argue that, in most cases, even the grandest fortresses were perennially cold, damp in summer, frigid in winter. The debate continues partly because comfort was defined differently in the Middle Ages. To medieval nobles, warmth itself was a luxury of status. To sweat indoors was not refinement but vulgarity. You listen as the wind lashes against the outer wall. The windows rattle softly in their iron frames. Beyond them, the night stretches across frozen fields, white, endless, and silent. Every sound inside the castle magnifies against the stone. The echo of footsteps, the soft groan of wood as the temperature shifts, the muffled cough of a servant somewhere down the corridor. It's easy to imagine the princess lying awake, listening to the night move through her castle like a restless spirit. A mainstream historical fact: castles in northern Europe and Britain rarely had glass windows before the late medieval period. Instead, they used oiled parchment, horn, or thin slices of mica to cover openings. These translucent materials let in light during the day, but did little to stop the cold. Even after glass became more common, it was a thin, uneven luxury, expensive, fragile, and poorly sealed. Every window was essentially an invitation to the wind. You step closer to the hearth, kneeling to feed the coals. A puff of smoke stings your eyes and catches in your throat. The air tastes faintly of soot and something older, stone and ash, mingled with the faint sweetness of the burning wood. The princess's maid would have done this hours ago, yet by now the warmth has ebbed away, swallowed by the room's vast emptiness. The bed curtains sway as if exhaling. You imagine her beneath them, hands tucked close to her chest, her breath frosting the pillow. She shifts occasionally, pulling the coverlets tighter, curling in on herself like a small animal seeking its own heat. This isn't the romantic stillness you might expect from fairy tales. It's a nightly battle against the cold one that began at sundown and lasts until dawn. A quirky tidbit whispers into memory. In some parts of Europe, it was customary to hang dried animal bladders filled with hot water beside the bed to release heat slowly overnight. Think of them as primitive hot water bottles, effective, if a bit unnerving. There are even records of peasants using warmed stones wrapped in cloth, carried from the hearth to bed, as a temporary reprieve from the frost. Royal chambers simply performed these rituals with more ceremony: silver pans instead of stones, perfumed oils instead of plain water, embroidered cloths instead of wool scraps. But the goal was the same: survive until morning. You look toward the high ceiling where wooden beams cross like the ribs of a great beast. Each creak, each soft pop of cooling timber reminds you that the structure itself breathes. The soundscape of the castle at night is never silent. It's a symphony of shifting air and living wood. For some, that would be comforting. For others, eerie. The princess may have had moments of dread when the wind rose suddenly, wailing through chimneys like lost voices. Servants told stories to explain those noises, that the wind carried the whispers of the dead, or that fairies brushed past the walls, searching for warmth themselves. In this flickering half-light, you can almost believe it. You trace the edge of a tapestry with your fingertips. Its woven figures, knights, falcons, and saints seem to move in the firelight, their colours dulled by centuries. Such hangings weren't merely decoration. They served as early insulation, blocking drafts and trapping warmth against the wall. In some royal castles, layers of cloth covered nearly every surface. The effect was less aesthetic and more practical, a cocoon against the cold. Still, even the best defences failed against a harsh northern wind. It slipped through cracks in the stone, down chimneys, under doors. The air felt alive, shifting constantly. You could never escape it, only delay it. That might be why medieval people associated winter nights with introspection, patience, and faith. When you cannot fight nature, you learn to listen to it. There's a particular smell in these cold chambers, a mix of burning wood, wet stone, tallow candles, and the faint musk of fir. It's oddly grounding, almost hypnotic. You close your eyes and hear the princess's slow breathing, the rustle of linen, the faint whistle of air through the window slit. The castle doesn't let anyone forget where they are, not even royalty. One scholar once described medieval sleep as a surrender to the elements. That phrase lingers as you imagine lying there, feeling the cold seep through the bedposts, through the floor, through time itself. It's a humbling thought how much effort it took simply to rest. Some nights, when the frost grew so thick it glazed the inside of window panes, servants would hang extra cloths over the glass and place bowls of glowing embers beneath the bed. It helped slightly. But even then, many princesses woke with stiff fingers, aching joints, and pale skin that never quite felt warm. You might imagine her rising before dawn, wrapping herself in layers of wool before daring to wash in water that had already frozen in the basin. There's something poetic in that persistence. She sleeps not because it's comfortable, but because she must. Her world runs on duty, ceremony, and endurance. And beneath the jeweled crowns and polished manners, there's a shared humanity. You know that feeling, that shiver, that small, defiant wish for morning light. The fire finally steadies again. A faint orange glow ripples across the floor, and the shadows soften. Outside, the wind begins to calm. You can almost sense the castle settling back into uneasy rest. The night will last a little longer, and so will the princess's dreams. The fire sighs low in the hearth, its light painting the walls in hues of gold and ember. You feel the temperature sink again, as though the entire castle exhales frost. This, you realize, is when warmth becomes both science and superstition. To sleep through a medieval winter night, a princess had to prepare not just her bed, but her very body, a slow, deliberate layering ritual that blurred the line between luxury and survival. The maidens begin their quiet procession long before midnight. One brings woolen undergarments, another carries a folded chemise of soft linen. The princess sits before her mirror, its surface rippling with candlelight, and watches the steam drift from the basin beside her. The air smells faintly of rosemary, believed to purify the spirit and ward off sickness. You can almost hear the whisper of fabric as she slips into layer after layer, transforming herself into a living fortress of warmth. Chroniclers of the age noted that noble women's night attire was as complex as their daytime finery. Beneath the outer gown lay linen shifts, woolen stockings, sometimes even padded underrobes sewn with fur trim. Silk was not for comfort, but for rank a shimmering outer symbol, not much use against freezing stone. And still, despite all those layers, the cold found ways to creep through. An unexpected detail from daily life was how these layers became part of etiquette. Guests were not expected to see a princess undressed, even if that meant merely removing a fur mantle. Dressing and undressing were performances of modesty and decorum, accompanied by attendants who handled each garment as though it were sacred. Imagine trying to sleep while maintaining dignity in 15 pounds of fabric. The princess breathes deeply, her sleeves whispering as she folds her hands. Her fingers glint with rings that have grown cold against her skin. The fire behind her hisses and pops, sending up brief showers of sparks that vanish before they reach the ceiling. In that glow, she resembles a saint in a stained glass window, serene, composed, and quietly uncomfortable. Experts remain divided on whether these layers truly helped as much as chroniclers claimed. Some argue that the multiple fabrics trapped both heat and moisture, making the sleeper clammy rather than cozy. Others believe the layering system was remarkably effective, especially when combined with furs and tightly drawn bed curtains. The truth, as always, likely lay somewhere in between, warm enough to endure, but never enough to forget the cold. The princess's final garment is her night robe, thick wool lined with sable or ermine. A maid fastens the ties with careful fingers, then lowers the hood so that only a few strands of hair escape. The princess dips her hands briefly in warm water, dries them with cloth embroidered in gold thread, and murmurs a prayer for health through the night. You can almost feel the heat from the basin fade as it's carried away, leaving behind only a thin mist that clings to the air. A moment later, the door closes with a soft thud, and silence returns except for the faint crackle of wood. The princess moves toward the bed, her steps hushed by woven rushes laid across the floor. Imagine the sound of fabric brushing fabric, the rustle of wool against silk, the weight of fur pressing down. She sits on the edge of the mattress, testing its firmness. Beneath the embroidered sheets lie feathers, wool, and perhaps even dried herbs, lavender, thyme, or mint, to scent the bed and deter insects. You can almost smell the sharp sweetness. It's generally accepted among medieval historians that personal hygiene and comfort rituals played a crucial role in noble life, not out of vanity but survival. Maintaining a clean, dry sleeping layer meant avoiding sickness in a world where cold and damp were constant threats. Bathing was rare in winter, so linen changes replaced washing. They absorbed sweat and acted as barriers between skin and coarse fabrics. The princess draws the covers over herself. Beneath the quilts, air pockets form like miniature caves of warmth. Her maid extinguishes the candle, and darkness falls thick as velvet. Only the faint pulse of the fire remains, glowing red like the last heartbeat of day. In that stillness, your senses sharpen. You can hear the soft rustle as she shifts her weight, the tiny sigh as she nestles deeper into the mattress. The smell of wool and herbs mixes with smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then falls silent. Some researchers insist that medieval women often slept sitting slightly upright, especially in drafty towers, believing it aided digestion and protected against bad humors settling in the chest. Others dismiss this as superstition, but the idea persisted for centuries, perhaps, because sitting up made it easier to breathe when the air was heavy with smoke or damp chill. The princess's dreams begin to drift in like snowflakes, soft, silent, and unpredictable. Perhaps she dreams of summer gardens, of sunlight sliding across stone, of the scent of roses thawing in the morning air. Or perhaps her mind lingers on duty and bloodlines, on the endless weight of expectation that follows her even into sleep. You step closer, hearing the faintest crack as the fire splits a log. A gust of air ripples through the curtains, lifting one edge like a ghostly hand. The temperature drops again, sudden and sharp. You can almost sense her flinch beneath the quilts. She tightens them around her shoulders, her breath fogging the darkness for an instant before vanishing. There's beauty in her resilience. For every comfort she owns, the castle demands something in return: patience, endurance, stillness. Each layer of clothing, each ritual before bed, is less about vanity and more about survival in an age that prized elegance under pressure. Outside, the wind gathers again. Snow begins to fall, drifting against the windows, soft as whispered prayers. The castle holds its breath, and within its stone heart, one woman sleeps wrapped in centuries of tradition, each layer a promise that dawn will come, even in the coldest of nights. The faint grey of early morning never truly touches these chambers, at least not yet. You remain in the quiet half-hour before dawn, when sleep still weighs on the castle like a heavy blanket. Inside the princess's room, the air is thick with the scent of wool, wood smoke, and the faint, sweet musk of crushed herbs. She stirs beneath her quilts, not yet awake, not fully dreaming. This is the heart of her winter world, the delicate border between rest and endurance. You take a moment to study the bed itself. It isn't just a place to lie down, it's a status symbol, a statement carved in oak and gilded in gold leaf. The mattress rises high above the floor, so tall a small stool waits at its foot to help her climb in. The canopy overhead drapes down like a private sky, heavy with embroidered curtains that close her off from the cold and, to a degree, from the world. Documents of the era reveal that bedding in royal households was often stuffed with goose feathers for the wealthy and straw or wool for lesser nobles. The choice wasn't just comfort, it was prestige. Feathers, plucked from imported geese or swans, were cleaned, dried, and sewn into fine linen sacks, luxuries that took weeks to prepare. Beneath them lay a coarser mattress filled with straw, serving as insulation from the cold, hard boards below. A peculiar tradition whispers that princesses would sometimes hide charms or stitched patterns of protection inside these feather mattresses, symbols against bad dreams or illness. A few of those charms have been found centuries later, tiny scraps of parchment inked with Latin prayers, folded and sewn into the seam. It's a reminder that warmth, in those times, wasn't only physical, it was spiritual insurance. The princess turns on her side, tugging the fur-lined coverlet closer. Beneath her pillow lies a sachet of dried lavender and chamomile, a small defense against lice and the rank odor of stale air. The mattress rustles faintly, and you imagine how it would have felt soft but uneven, its feathers shifting under her weight, creating small pockets of warmth and coolness. Opinions differ among historians about just how comfortable these beds really were. Some believe that the feather-stuffed mattresses were marvels of medieval luxury, while others claim they were lumpy, prone to mildew, and far too soft for long-term health. Whatever the truth, one can assume that a princess's bed, even imperfect, was leagues beyond what most of her subjects could ever dream of. You take in the room's stillness. Every surface holds a story. The carved bedposts shaped like vines, the rush mats layered over the flagstones, the embroidered hangings that ripple faintly when the wind sneaks beneath the door. You sense the delicate balance between extravagance and necessity. The castle doesn't pamper its inhabitants, it tests them. Each detail of comfort must be wrestled from the cold itself. One well-documented truth is that the bedding hierarchy mirrored the rigid structure of society. The more layers and materials between a sleeper and the stone floor, the higher their status. Commoners might sleep on sacks of straw or hay spread directly on planks. Servants in royal households used wool pallets on low cots. Only the upper nobility enjoyed feather beds and fur-lined blankets, sometimes perfumed with rosewater or juniper to mask the scent of damp. You walk to the hearth, now reduced to a dull red glow. The warmth is barely there, but still you can sense the memory of last night's fire. The air is dry, almost brittle. The stones surrounding the fireplace are dark with soot, centuries of smoke staining them like shadows of every winter before. Outside, a gust of wind rattles the shutters. A fine dust of frost shakes loose and falls like glitter onto the sill. You run a hand across it. The cold bites like tiny needles. How strange it must have been to live surrounded by beauty, and yet never be free from the simplest discomforts. The princess's maid slips quietly into the chamber, her shoes muffled by rushes. She moves like a ghost, carrying a copper pan filled with embers. Kneeling by the hearth, she stirs the ashes, coaxing life back into the coals. The soft sound iron scraping against stone is both harsh and soothing. The princess doesn't wake. She has learned to sleep through it, to let the daily rhythm of service flow around her like a lullaby. Here's a small, delightful fragment of history. In some royal households, the quality of the bedding was listed in official inventories alongside jewelry, silverware, and horses. The linens could be passed down generations, repaired by skilled seamstresses who specialized in nothing but mending sheets. It wasn't only about sleep, it was legacy, proof of a family's refinement. The maid adds a log to the rekindled flame, then draws the curtains slightly apart. A thin beam of dawn light filters in, cold and colorless. It catches on the princess's hair, glinting like pale gold against the shadow. She murmurs softly in her sleep, one hand half buried in fur. You pause and think about the layers beneath her, the hierarchy of materials, textures, and scents, each one carefully chosen to create a cocoon against the season. Linen, wool, down, fur, silk. It's an architecture of rest, a quiet mirror of the castle's design itself. Layer upon layer, defense upon defense, all in the service of surviving the night. No consensus has ever been reached on whether these beds were truly warm enough to combat the cold that lingered through stone and draught. Some architectural historians argue that no amount of bedding could counteract a castle's chill. Others point to written accounts describing rooms so hot from the fire that one could barely breathe. Both could be true. Heat in a medieval castle was uneven, fleeting, and temperamental. The princess finally stirs. The faint creak of the mattress seems amplified in the stillness. She pushes aside the curtain, blinking at the dim light. Her skin is pale, her lips faintly blue, yet there's a calm grace in her movements. She's survived another night, as all her ancestors did before her. You can almost feel the quiet triumph in that simple act, enduring the cold, waking into light. It isn't the luxury that defines her, but her resilience wrapped in silk and frost. The castle hums softly around her, alive once more. And you? You breathe in the faint scent of smoke and lavender, realizing that comfort, like warmth, has always been relative, something earned, never guaranteed, even behind the thickest walls of power. The fire now burns a steady amber, its warmth curling upward through air that still trembles with last night's chill. You can almost feel the ghost of cold clinging to the corners of the room, persistent, patient, unwilling to leave. The princess sits up slowly, her breath visible, her fingers stiff as she folds back the coverlets. Every morning begins this way, a quiet victory against the cold, followed by a careful reconstruction of comfort. A servant enters carrying a copper kettle, steam spilling from its spout. The smell of hot metal and oak smoke fills the room. She pours the water into a shallow basin, where the princess will wash her hands and face before breakfast. The warmth lasts barely a minute before it cools, the steam vanishing into the castle's cavernous air. Even this brief luxury feels sacred, a moment of softness between stone and frost. Surviving manuscripts tell us that in most medieval castles, morning warmth was as fleeting as candlelight. Fires were left to die during the night to avoid accidents, meaning each dawn began with rekindling the smell of ashes, the creak of bellows, and the flint's sharp spark. A princess's comfort depended entirely on her servant's timing. Too early, and smoke filled the chamber. Too late, and frost formed on the inside of the walls. The bed behind her still holds the imprint of her body, a hollow of feathers and linen. The maid begins her ritual of shaking, turning, and fluffing an elaborate ballet designed to prevent moisture from settling into the bedding. It's delicate work. Damp feathers rot, and rot attracts vermin. The steady rhythm of the maid's motions becomes a sound of reassurance, an unspoken promise that the bed will be warm again come nightfall. A lesser-known curiosity from that time is how bed warmers themselves became status symbols. These were not crude tools, but polished bronze or silver pans with intricate engravings, sometimes even bearing family crests. The coals inside hissed softly as they slid beneath the sheets, leaving faint scorch marks if handled too long. In some courts, it was said a careful servant could heat an entire bed without waking its occupant, a small miracle performed nightly. The princess watches from her stool, wrapped in a fur mantle, eyes half-lidded. Her hair has been braided to keep it from tangling in her sleep, and her breath carries faint traces of lavender. She stretches her fingers toward the hearth, feeling the weak warmth radiate outward. In this still moment, you realize how deliberate every act of comfort must have been. Nothing in this world comes easily, not even heat. Some researchers believe the ritual of bed warming may have held symbolic meaning as well. It wasn't merely about heat, but purification, driving away not just cold, but evil spirits and sickness. The glowing coals, handled with tongs like relics, brought fire's sacred energy to the most intimate of spaces. Others disagree, seeing only practicality. Yet the line between superstition and science in the Middle Ages was as thin as the fabric of the sheets themselves. Outside, a bell tolls faintly, its sound distant and muffled by snow. The castle begins to stir awake. You hear boots on flagstones, the clatter of buckets, the faint neigh of horses from the stables. Life resumes its rhythm, each motion deliberate and slow, as though the entire household must thaw before it can function. It's generally accepted among medieval historians that heating a room was a communal effort. Even in royal chambers, servants and attendants shared the burden. The princess might command comfort, but it was others who labored through the cold to create it, fetching wood, tending embers, refilling bed warmers. Heat was not a private thing. It was collective, produced by hands unseen but always present. You picture her bed just before sleep, the coals glowing faintly beneath the sheets, the thick curtains drawn close, the faint hum of voices fading as doors close for the night. The warmth is temporary, fragile, yet it feels almost sacred in its impermanence. It is a warmth earned through ritual and care. A peculiar superstition lingers in the minds of many castle servants. If you let the fire die completely before dawn, it was said misfortune would enter with the first light. So someone, often the youngest page or scullion, would remain half awake through the night, feeding the hearth every few hours. Imagine that the soft scrape of coal against iron, the hiss of flame, and a pair of tired eyes watching over the sleeping court. You find yourself thinking about the balance of danger and comfort. Fires could save lives or end them. One spark too high, one ember too near a curtain, and the entire chamber could go up in flames. Castles burned often, especially in winter. It's astonishing how easily opulence and disaster shared the same bed. Some specialists continue to dispute how well these hearths actually heated their rooms. Architectural reconstructions suggest that even a roaring fire could barely warm the space beyond 6 or 7 feet. Beyond that, breath still fogged the air. The princess's chamber may have looked radiant in torchlight, but in truth, much of it remained cold shadow. The maid finishes her work, folding the sheets with precise care. She opens the curtains to let in the pale light. Snow still falls outside, slow and silent, covering the courtyard in white velvet. The sound is almost imperceptible, but you can feel it, the weight of winter pressing on every surface, muffling every noise. The princess rises, moving gracefully despite the chill. She steps into fur-lined slippers and crosses to the window. Her reflection merges with the snow beyond, creating a ghostly double, one woman of warmth and life, gazing out into a world of stillness. The contrast is striking. Here's one charming oddity worth mentioning. Some noble families train dogs called comfort hounds, small breeds whose sole purpose was to share their owners' beds for warmth. These little animals, wrapped in ribbons and miniature cloaks, slept curled at their mistress's feet, providing living heat. It's a sweet thought that even royalty needed a creature's heartbeat to stay warm through the longest nights. The room settles again. The fire crackles softly, and the scent of oak fills the air. You realize, as the princess does, that warmth is fleeting but ritual is eternal. Every ember, every fold of cloth, every shared breath across the cold carries a single message: survival, wrapped in grace. The wind has quieted for now, though the air remains brittle. In the silence, you can hear the faint ticking of cooling stone walls releasing the heat they greedily absorbed during the night. A castle, you realize, never truly warms. It only holds its breath between bouts of freezing. The princess sits near the hearth, watching the flames dance, her fingers hovering close enough to feel warmth but not scorch. Her fire is the heart of the room, both comfort and threat. Every night, the same routine unfolds. Logs stacked, coals banked, and flames coaxed to life by servants who treat fire like a living creature, temperamental, demanding, and sometimes deadly. The hearth is not merely decoration, it's survival, sculpted in stone. Archaeological evidence suggests that most castle fireplaces in northern Europe were colossal, sometimes large enough for several people to stand inside. They weren't built for beauty, but for endurance. The massive chimneys pulled smoke upward, though imperfectly. Soot blackened the ceilings, and stray embers often escaped into the room. Many noble families kept buckets of sand nearby, not as ornamentation, but as insurance against catastrophe. An amusing little custom involved scattering dried herbs, sage, rosemary, or thyme into the fire before bed. The popping of the leaves filled the room with sharp, pleasant scents and was believed to drive away evil spirits. You can almost smell it now, the mingled fragrance of burning wood and herbs, as though the night itself is being exorcised. Some medievalists can't seem to agree if fires burned through the night or were allowed to die before dawn. One theory holds that hearths were tended constantly by servants sleeping nearby, ensuring that the royal family never woke to a frozen room. Others argue the opposite, that fires were dampened to embers at bedtime, both to conserve wood and avoid disaster. In a world lit by flame, safety was a thin line of glowing ash. You look around the chamber. Every surface bears the mark of smoke, the ceiling faintly veiled in soot, the tapestries near the hearth singed at the edges. The faint warmth stretches across the room like a lazy tide, stronger near the fire, fading quickly toward the bed. It's not enough, not really, but it's something. The princess leans forward, using a poker to adjust the logs. Sparks leap upward in a brief golden flurry before settling again. Her movements are practiced. She's done this countless times. Despite all her attendants, this act she insists on doing herself. Fire is control, and control is rare in her world. One well-preserved truth from castle records tells us that wood was one of the most precious resources of the medieval winter. Whole forests could be depleted to keep a single fortress alive through the season. Logs were rationed and inventoried with as much care as jewels. Some castles even issued fire allowances, set quantities of fuel allotted daily to specific rooms. It was luxury measured in warmth. You imagine the sound of those logs cracking, the soft hiss as sap boils and escapes. The fire seems alive, its breath mingling with the princess's. Shadows pulse against the walls, stretching and shrinking as though the castle itself were breathing. A curious ritual often accompanied this time of night. Just before sleep, a servant might place an iron rod heated in the fire at the base of the bed to warm the floorboards. The faint smell of singed wood mingled with the air, and the warmth, though fleeting, spread upward for a few minutes. It's a small detail, but one that speaks volumes about how resourceful and desperate people became when the cold was relentless. There's something meditative in the rhythm of the flames. They pop, they whisper, they sigh. The princess watches them, eyes half closed, as though divining patterns in their movement. Firelight paints her cheeks with gold and crimson, giving the illusion of life in a world of frost. Some researchers argue that these massive hearths were more psychological than practical. The heat they produced was uneven and inefficient, yet their glow provided comfort, the illusion of safety. The human mind, after all, craves light as much as warmth. In a dark stone fortress, even the smallest flame becomes a companion. The air around you hums softly, like a memory trapped in stone. The fire's warmth doesn't reach the corners of the room, where frost still clings stubbornly to the windows. The contrast between light and cold is sharp, almost cruel. Yet it's also strangely beautiful proof of survival, flickering against the impossible vastness of winter. The princess stands, her fur cloak brushing the rush-covered floor. She holds her hands above the fire, palms open, the orange glow gilding her rings. She looks momentarily like a statue, ancient, serene, enduring. You can almost imagine generations of women before her doing the same, whispering the same silent prayers for warmth, safety, and mourning. A lesser-known fragment from household accounts reveals that ash collected from the hearth was used for practical magic mixed with salt to protect doorways, or scattered in gardens come spring to bless the soil. Nothing went to waste. Even the residue of fire carried meaning. The flames flicker low now, quieter, gentler. The princess reaches for the poker one last time, pushing the embers into a glowing heap. She covers them carefully with ash, a ritual of closure, a way to make sure the fire slumbers safely until morning. The faint orange fades to red, then to a dull, comforting grey. Experts in medieval domestic life remain fascinated by this nightly dialogue between people and fire. To them, it's more than survival, it's companionship. In a world without central heating, the hearth wasn't just warmth, it was presence, a steady heartbeat in the cold silence. You step back, letting the darkness reclaim the room. The last whispers of warmth brush against your skin as the fire exhales its final sigh. Somewhere beyond the walls, snow begins to fall again, soft as ash, silent as breath. The castle, momentarily at peace, settles into its long winter night once more. The fire dwindles to a soft glow, and the air turns heavy again. Every sound, every creak of timber, every whisper of frost along the stones feels amplified in the stillness. The princess shifts beneath her layered blankets, the edge of the fur brushing against her cheek. Around her, the chamber has become a fortress within a fortress, guarded not by swords or sentries, but by fabric, texture, and silence. This is where the art of warmth truly blossoms. You can almost feel it. The thick curtains, the hanging tapestries, the folds of velvet and wool that line the walls. The medieval castle, for all its strength, was a poor match against wind. But people clever, practical, endlessly adaptive, learned how to weave their defenses from thread and patience. Researchers widely agree that wall hangings were not simply decoration but insulation. Heavy cloth absorbed the cold air seeping through stone, trapping small pockets of heat. The difference between a bare wall and a draped one could mean several degrees of temperature, enough to make the difference between comfort and shivering misery. A quaint belief circulating in those days held that richly dyed tapestries not only warmed the room but protected against melancholy. Blue and green calmed the mind, while red was said to chase away the chill of the soul. You picture the princess selecting her favorite colors, crimson vines winding around gold-threaded flowers, and imagine how her eyes might linger on them before sleep, searching for warmth in color itself. No consensus has ever been reached on just how effective these hangings were. Some architectural historians argue that they served more symbolic than practical purpose, meant to display wealth rather than retain heat. Others insist that tapestries, layered with padding or backed by linen, were remarkably efficient insulators. The truth, perhaps, lies in both: beauty serving utility, comfort disguised as art. The air smells faintly of wool and beeswax. You reach out, brushing your hand along a nearby drape. The fabric feels thick, almost heavy enough to have weight of its own, with fine threads that glimmer faintly in the dim light. It's soft against your fingertips, and yet you can sense the chill behind it, the cold pressing against the far side like an animal pacing its cage. The princess once commissioned a set of embroidered panels from Flanders, so the story goes, each one depicting scenes from mythology. These weren't simple decorations, but narrative walls. As she drifted towards sleep, her gaze might wander from Persephone, rising from the underworld, to St. Margaret defying the dragon, her imagination walking those woven paths while her body remained still beneath the covers. One charming oddity worth mentioning is that tapestries were sometimes scented intentionally. Fragrant herbs were sewn between layers of fabric, allowing their aroma to release slowly with heat. The result was a room that didn't just look warm, it smelled warm. The air perfumed with thyme, rose, or even musk imported from the east. You can almost breathe it in now, faint but lingering, the perfume of protection. As you stand near the wall, you realize how every surface has been softened. Thick rugs muffle footsteps, wooden screens block drafts from the door. Even the canopy above her bed serves a purpose. Beyond luxury, it creates a microclimate, trapping the small amount of heat her body generates. The medieval world understood layering better than any modern designer could. Some experts remain divided on the use of wall tapestries in lesser castles or colder climates. In royal courts, they were masterpieces woven with silk and gold thread. But in humbler halls, they might be nothing more than patched wool blankets or stretched animal hides. And yet the effect was the same: to create a feeling of enclosure, of comfort, of separation from the biting world outside. You glance toward the window. Frost has drawn delicate lace patterns on the glass, fragile, temporary artwork gifted by the night. The curtain beside it moves ever so slightly, the air beyond whispering through the seams. In a place where warmth is a constant negotiation, every motion of fabric becomes meaningful. It's generally accepted among medieval historians that the richest tapestries traveled with their owners. When the royal family moved from one castle to another, servants would roll the wall hangings, pack them in waxed linen, and transport them ahead of the household. The princess's warmth was portable, her comfort carefully curated. Wherever she went, her surroundings could be rebuilt, an empire of fabric raised anew. An unexpected custom recorded in a few letters suggests that guests were judged not only by their titles, but by how they reacted to the cold. To shiver openly before a princess was seen as a breach of etiquette. Guests were expected to admire her fine tapestries and praise her ever-temperate air, even if their teeth chattered behind courtly smiles. Politeness demanded endurance. You can almost hear the faint rustle as servants adjust the curtains for the night. The sound is soothing, a soft brushing of fabric, like waves against the shore. Each motion creates layers between life and cold, between the body and the elements. Some specialists in medieval domestic life believe that these small rituals repeated night after night, shaped not just comfort but culture. The act of drawing curtains, smoothing bed covers, and lighting candles was a performance of stability. In a world of draught and danger, order itself became warmth. The princess lies beneath her canopy, half awake. The light from the hearth flickers through the folds of her curtains, casting patterns that ripple like water across the embroidered walls. She traces them with her eyes, following imaginary rivers that wind through her woven landscapes. Outside, snow taps softly at the window, a delicate reminder that the world beyond remains untamed. Inside, all is fabric and firelight, scent and softness, the fragile illusion of safety. You can almost feel it settle around you too, the comfort of cloth, the warmth of art, and the hum of stories stitched into every thread. The fire murmurs low, the room awash in shadow and amber glow. Outside, the wind prowls along the battlements, howling faintly through the arrow slits like a chorus of ghosts. The princess has drawn her curtains closed, her small kingdom of fabric sealing her from the worst of the chill. Yet the night has other plans for company unexpected, breathing, sometimes snoring company. Because even a royal bed, no matter how lavish, was rarely empty. The idea of sleeping alone in a vast, freezing chamber was not just lonely, it was dangerous. Warmth was a communal affair, and proximity the oldest form of survival. Chroniclers of the time noted that noble women, even princesses, often shared their sleeping space with ladies-in-waiting or trusted companions during winter. It wasn't scandalous, it was sensible. The combined heat of several bodies could make the difference between comfort and hypothermia. The air inside the bed curtains would grow warmer by the hour, heavy with breath and murmured dreams. An endearing fragment of folklore claims that certain small lapdogs were bred specifically as bed warmers. Tiny creatures with long fur, they curled themselves into the hollow between their mistress's knees or at her feet. It's said that when these dogs woke to change position, their owners would shift unconsciously too, both species engaged in an ancient dance of warmth. Opinions differ among social historians about how intimate this shared sleeping truly was. Some argue that noble companionship was purely practical, devoid of sentiment. Others believe that these nightly arrangements fostered deep bonds, relationships woven through whispered confidences and shared endurance. Imagine it. In the flicker of candlelight, secrets and laughter blooming like sparks before fading back into darkness. You watch as the princess turns beneath her coverlets. A soft rustle, a sigh. From the far side of the bed, a faint snore answers her. Somewhere near the hearth, a cat shifts lazily, stretching out in the heat's last breath. The chamber is alive in small ways, breathing, pulsing, dreaming. Researchers have found references to animals being deliberately kept indoors through winter dogs, cats, even trained ferrets to catch mice that sought shelter in the same warmth as their owners. A castle, after all, was never truly quiet. Behind the elegance of velvet and fur lived the scratch, purr, and scurry of unseen companions. A lesser-known curiosity from household accounts reveals that some royal families kept pet monkeys, tiny capuchins, or macaques gifted by foreign dignitaries. These mischievous animals often ended up sharing sleeping quarters, their antics both amusement and annoyance. The thought of a princess trying to rest, while a restless monkey chattered nearby, is as absurd as it is humanizing. The princess, though, has grown used to it, all the creaks of beams, the rustle of creatures, the soft murmurs of her attendants settling down nearby. Privacy, in her world, is a myth. Even dreams are a shared experience. Some researchers argue that sleeping communally wasn't only about warmth, it also offered safety. In castles filled with intrigue, servants, and secrets, being alone meant vulnerability. To sleep surrounded by trusted attendants was both comfort and protection. If something stirred in the dark, a knock, a whisper, a shadow, there would be witnesses. You imagine her drifting towards sleep, the warmth of another human's presence steady beside her, two breaths rising and falling in rhythm, the sound mingling with the faint hiss of the hearth. It's a simple image, and somehow the most tender of all. It's generally accepted among medieval historians that social boundaries around sleep were far looser than modern norms. Servants might share chambers with nobles, travelers with strangers, entire families huddled together in cottages. The concept of personal space would have seemed foreign. Warmth, not solitude, was the currency of survival. An amusing little detail preserved in letters from French courts describes how young noblewomen sometimes named their bed-warming dogs after saints, claiming that invoking Saint Pierre or Saint Clare to their laps brought divine comfort. The church frowned upon it, naturally, yet even pious abbesses were rumoured to keep small pets hidden in their cells during cold winters. Faith, it seemed, did not preclude the need for fur. The princess stirs again. A candle guttering near the hearth throws a shadow across her curtain, tall, wavering, almost human. The figure of her lady-in-waiting moves quietly, tucking the last corner of a blanket, then kneeling briefly in prayer. A few murmured Latin words drift through the still air. They sound like gratitude for warmth, for breath, for dawn still promised. Experts remain uncertain how comfortable these nights truly were. Some suggest that the combined heat of people and animals could make the air stifling, the scent overwhelming. Others describe it as bliss, a rare pocket of shared humanity in a world of stone and frost. Maybe both are true. Comfort is often messy, and warmth has never been perfectly clean. A tiny squeak echoes from the far wall. The cat, alert again, lifts its head, eyes glowing amber in the firelight. The sound fades. The animal yawns, curls tighter, and resumes its vigil. Its tail flicks once approval, perhaps. The castle breathes. You sense a deep peace in this moment. The layers of fur, flesh, and friendship merge into one quiet rhythm of endurance. Outside, snow covers everything: roofs, battlements, the distant forest. Inside, life persists through touch, through closeness, through warmth freely shared. And you understand, as the princess does, that survival in winter is rarely solitary. It's a pact between woman and servant, between human and animal, between the fragile spark of the hearth and the endless night beyond. The castle sleeps on, but the air feels thicker now, warm from the fire's lingering breath, laced with the sense of humanity and something faintly floral. The princess, still curled in her bed, inhales deeply. Beneath the perfume of fur and candle smoke drifts a quieter fragrance: lavender, rose, and something sharp, almost medicinal. These aren't mere indulgences, they're weapons in an invisible war. Because in a medieval castle, the cold wasn't the only thing that crept into your bed. Contemporary accounts confirm that the grandest chambers were alive not just with courtiers and servants, but with fleas, lice, and every tiny creature drawn to warmth. Even royalty scratched in secret. Sheets and hangings could harbour entire colonies, hiding in folds and seams. Hygiene was both obsession and impossibility. So the princess, like everyone else, turned to nature and superstition for relief. A whimsical practice survived in a few noble households. Beds were scattered with crushed herbs, believed to repel pests and purify the air. Lavender, rosemary, mint, and wormwood were favourites. Servants stitched small linen sachets filled with herbs and tucked them between layers of bedding. When body heat warmed them, their scent released a mix of sweetness and smoke that filled the chamber. You can almost smell it now, soothing yet sharp enough to sting the nose. Some specialists continue to debate how effective these herbal defenses really were. Modern analysis suggests the oils might deter insects briefly, but offered no long-term solution. Others insist the psychological comfort they provided was just as vital. In a world where medicine and magic blurred, belief itself could make one sleep easier. You can imagine the princess sitting before bed, watching her maid sprinkle powdered rose petals across the sheets, murmuring that it would invite only gentle dreams. The gesture is half ritual, half comfort, a small, fragrant hope against the crawling realities of castle life. One lesser-known curiosity: Perfumed oils were sometimes rubbed along the bedposts and around the bed's edge, both as insect repellents and as charms against restless spirits. Some recipes even included crushed pearls or gold leaf, believed to elevate the soul as well as the scent. The princess's chamber would have glimmered faintly in candlelight, the oil catching the light like dew. A heated debate among historians revolves around how much of this was science versus superstition. Some point to the clear antiseptic qualities of certain herbs. Rosemary and thyme were later proven to have mild antibacterial effects. Others argue that the focus on scent and ritual shows the medieval obsession with balance and purity rather than hygiene in the modern sense. Perhaps, in a time before germ theory, smell was comfort, and comfort was health. You walk closer to the bed and catch the faint perfume rising from the folds. It mingles with smoke, fur, and faint human warmth, creating a scent both strange and beautiful, one that speaks of endurance. The air hums with it, heavy but not unpleasant. The princess shifts in her sleep, perhaps dreaming of gardens, sunlight, or open air untainted by stone walls and fear of frost. An unexpected detail from household letters describes how wealthier nobles imported dried flowers from the Mediterranean to stuff into pillows, rose petals, marjoram, even slices of orange peel. It was an extravagance of scent, a luxury so rare that entire shipments were recorded in royal ledgers alongside jewels. The fragrance, they said, soothed the heart and kept nightmares away. Near the window, the candle gutters. The wax has melted down to a puddle, its sweet scent faint but familiar. You glance toward the hearth. The embers glow low, breathing softly. The flicker of light moves across the tapestries, illuminating tiny embroidered flowers that mirror those buried in the bedclothes, a private garden blooming in the dead of winter. Researchers have found that these sensory landscapes weren't accidental. Medieval life depended on smell. Without perfumes and herbs, a castle's air grew rank quickly, thick with smoke, sweat, tallow, and rot. Fragrance was survival disguised as elegance. It masked, soothed, and sanctified. A peculiar superstition tells that burning certain herbs before bed could banish nightmares. Some households burned bundles of rue and sage on the hearth, waving the smoke over pillows while reciting verses. The princess's maid might whisper, "Bad dreams, begone," her voice steady, her hands practiced. Whether it worked or not didn't matter, ritual gave shape to fear. You pause beside the bed, feeling how heavy the air has become, warm, fragrant, full of history. Even the silence seems perfumed. Somewhere in the corner, the cat sneezes softly, offended by the herbal fog. The princess murmurs something in her sleep, a half-formed word, then drifts back into stillness. It's generally accepted among scholars of domestic life that this mingling of scent and superstition reflected a deeper medieval truth, that comfort was inseparable from belief. People didn't just smell safety, they prayed for it, wove it, burned it, and breathed it. You glance up. The ceiling beams above are darkened by centuries of smoke, but the air tonight feels almost soft. The scents wrap around you like invisible curtains, warm, nostalgic, and fleeting. The smell of herbs becomes memory, and memory becomes peace. And as the castle settles deeper into its midnight rhythm, you realize this was their version of luxury. Not the absence of discomfort, but the brief illusion that nature itself, flowers, fire, fur, could be tamed for a night. The candle has burned down to a nub, and the air is thick with the mingled fragrance of herbs, tallow, and lingering wood smoke. The princess shifts beneath her heavy quilts, the sound of rustling linen echoing softly in the stillness. The fire has sunk into quiet embers now, pulsing like a red heartbeat in the dark. There is one more line of defense against the night's cold. The last, most personal, the body itself. You can almost see her breath in the dim air, the soft cloud that forms with every exhale. Even for a princess, warmth was never a guarantee. It was a negotiation with the elements. When every fire dwindled and every curtain trembled with the wind's intrusion, she turned to her own body, to layers of cloth, to movement, to endurance. Records from the period show that many nobles slept in their clothes during the coldest months. Nightgowns of soft linen or thick wool were only the beginning. Over them came sleeveless mantles, shawls, even fur-lined robes sometimes worn right over the covers themselves. Clothes weren't just garments, they were portable blankets, proof that fashion and necessity were bedfellows. A charming oddity recorded in a 14th century household manual recommends sleeping in one's day cloak on the harshest nights, with the hood pulled tight. For thus may one dream sweetly, the author notes, and rise in the morning as a knight from snow. You imagine the princess laughing softly as her maid folds the cloak around her shoulders, the fur brushing her chin. The sound of laughter in a room like this, so cold, so fragile, feels like defiance itself. There's no consensus among historians on whether wearing so many layers actually helped. Some modern textile experts argue that too much fabric could trap moisture, chilling the body faster once heat escaped. Others claim it created an insulating bubble, especially when combined with bed curtains and feather mattresses. Either way, the practice reveals something deeply human, the instinct to wrap oneself in every available comfort, no matter how awkward. You hear the faint sigh of fabric as she shifts again. The layers rub softly together, creating a hush like distant waves. The weight of all those garments presses down, grounding her in a slow, steady warmth. Every fibre carries its own story. The wool spun by women in distant villages, the silk dyed with imported saffron, the fur hunted from winter forests and traded across kingdoms. Each one connects her to a web of unseen labour and landscape. Archaeological findings reveal that some medieval garments were quilted with astonishing intricacy, stitched in patterns meant not only for beauty but to trap heat. These garments were padded with down or even wool waist, transforming clothing into armour against the cold. The princess's robe, with its embroidered edges and carefully hidden seams, was less a luxury than a personal furnace. An amusing custom lingered in noble courts. The wealthiest women perfumed their bedclothes with drops of ambergris or rose oil so that their sleep would smell of spring. The irony, of course, is that the same oils stiffened the fabrics and sometimes even stained them. Comfort had its costs, but vanity rarely yielded to practicality. The princess draws her knees closer, her breath steady, her eyes fluttering shut. Around her, the castle settles deeper into silence. The wind hums faintly through the cracks in the shutters. You can almost feel the chill trying to creep in, defeated at last by the fortress she's built from wool and willpower. It's generally accepted among medievalists that warmth wasn't merely a matter of temperature, but of rhythm. People moved differently in winter. They conserved motion, huddled, shared space. Even in sleep, their bodies learned to fold inward, to preserve energy. The princess's posture curled, layered, enclosed mirrors that instinct perfectly. She becomes her own hearth. A peculiar superstition mentioned in monastic writings held that one should never sleep completely naked, lest cold creep through the soul. The body, they believed, needed boundaries to contain its heat, both physical and spiritual. You can almost hear the old priest's warning echo faintly through time. Cloth shields more than skin. The air in the chamber thickens with stillness. You notice how the texture of sound changes here, soft, muffled, as if the fabrics themselves absorb noise. The faint scrape of a log in the hearth, the whisper of a turning body, the distant drip of melting ice, each one feels more intimate, more fragile. Her garments shift slightly as she exhales, the fur glinting in the faint glow. There's a strange beauty in the sight, a woman wrapped in the trophies of nature, outlasting the cold through sheer layers of resourcefulness. You realize that every piece of clothing is a quiet act of defiance against the season, a statement that luxury and survival are one and the same. An unexpected historical note: some royal seamstresses stitched tiny silver bells or embroidered charms into the hems of nightclothes, not for sound, but for protection. The soft chime, if it happened at all, was thought to repel evil spirits that wandered through the castle after midnight. The princess's robe, heavy as it is, might carry such a secret. a lullaby of metal too faint to hear. Outside, snow still falls, silent and relentless. The window glass glows faintly with moonlight. The princess lies motionless now, her breathing slow and even. Beneath all those layers, beneath the perfume and the furs and the legends of warmth, she dreams not of luxury, but of sunlight on water, of grass between bare toes, of freedom from cold and ceremony. You watch her sleep, realizing that even here, in this fortress of wealth and ritual, comfort is never effortless. It's created anew each night, stitched, layered, and believed into being. The castle may hold her, but warmth is something she earns with every breath. And so she drifts, wrapped in garments, stories, and the quiet dignity of survival. The fire sighs once more. The wind presses its cold lips against the glass, and the night carries on indifferent, eternal, yet always conquered, one sleeping princess at a time. The castle lies in its deepest silence now, that peculiar hush that descends when both humans and fires have surrendered to exhaustion. The only sound comes from the restless wind beyond the walls, a low moan that slips through gaps in the shutters and licks at the edges of the curtains. The princess doesn't stir, though somewhere in her dreams, that whispering wind may weave itself into something else. Footsteps, perhaps, or voices calling from the dark. Here, in the dim light, you notice a glow. One lone candle still burns near the bed, its flame trembling like a living thought. It stands guard beside a polished brass holder, reflecting the chamber in miniature, the bed, the furs, the faint curl of smoke from the hearth. In a world without electricity, light was more than visibility. It was safety. Documents of the period reveal that candlelight in noble chambers wasn't left unattended for luxury's sake. Candles served a dual purpose, illumination and protection. Darkness was associated with danger, both physical and spiritual. To extinguish every flame before sleeping was to invite what the mind might conjure in the void. A peculiar little custom recorded in royal accounts tells that the last candle of the night was called the soul flame. It burned low beside the sleeper, symbolizing divine watchfulness until dawn. The princess, like others of her rank, likely believed that as long as a single light flickered, no harm could cross her threshold. The candle wavers now, its light crawling across the walls. The long tapestries ripple faintly, throwing shapes that mimic movement. For a moment, you could almost believe the embroidered figures are alive, knights riding across stitched fields, angels stretching their wings of thread. Experts remain divided on whether medieval people feared the dark more than modern ones do. Some argue that their nights were filled with comfort, ritual, and community, so much so that fear rarely had room to bloom. Others insist that darkness was the great unknown, a canvas for superstition and dread. Certainly, the princess would have known both feelings, the comfort of ritual light and the pull of imagination when shadows began to move. The air smells faintly of tallow, a mix of smoke, wax, and something animal. You can almost feel it coating the inside of your nose, a constant reminder of the physicality of fire. The princess's eyes flicker open briefly. She turns her head toward the flame, watching it the way one might watch a companion breathing. In this world, even light has personality. Near the door, a guard shifts on his stool. You hear the faint clink of chainmail, the creak of leather. Somewhere down the corridor, another servant coughs. These sounds, faint as they are, mean safety. They mean someone else is awake, listening. A delightful eccentricity of courtly life was the use of night watchers, attendants assigned to stay awake through the small hours to ensure fires didn't die, candles didn't tip, and intruders didn't slip through unguarded doors. These watchers carried small lanterns or oil lamps, their light swaying along the corridors in endless slow patrols. If you imagine it now, the castle at night becomes a constellation, tiny points of light moving through stone darkness. Researchers have long puzzled over how people manage to sleep deeply in such conditions. Even a whisper can echo against stone. A candle can throw monstrous shadows. And yet, people did sleep perhaps more lightly, more often interrupted, but enough to dream. Sleep was not an escape, but a fragile truce with the world. The princess murmurs something, her hand twitching against the coverlet. You catch the reflection of her rings flashing briefly in the candlelight. She's dreaming again, maybe of sunlight, or of a hunt in summer woods, or of a face she once saw in the flickering glow of another fire. Dreams were precious here, half memory, half hope. Some historians suggest that medieval sleepers often woke halfway through the night, in what was called the first sleep. They would pray, talk, or even read by candlelight before drifting back into a second sleep. This rhythm, sleep, wake, reflect, sleep again, was natural in a world that followed the fire's ebb and flow. Perhaps the princess too will wake soon, lift her head to watch the flame, whisper a brief prayer, then sink once more into the dark. You notice how the candle's light seems smaller now. The wax has melted down, pooling at its base. The flame flickers violently as if struggling to stay awake. The air itself feels tense, waiting. Then, with a soft sigh, the candle goes out. For a heartbeat, the chamber vanishes. The darkness feels thick, physical, pressing in on every side. You can hear your own breath and hers. The faint crackle of an ember breaks the silence, followed by the soft rustle of fabric as she shifts under her covers. She doesn't call out, doesn't stir too much. She's used to it, this moment when the light dies and imagination takes its place. It's generally accepted among scholars that fear of the dark shaped many bedtime customs of the medieval world: night prayers, protective charms, even the placement of beds facing altars or holy images. For the princess, her candle's glow may have been as much spiritual reassurance as physical comfort. An unexpected household note mentions that some noble families trained servants known as tapers, young attendants whose job was to light or snuff candles upon request, often sleeping nearby with flint and steel ready. To live surrounded by light was not effortless. It required constant, human tending, like warmth itself. The fire shifts again, sending one final flicker of light across the room. In its brief glow, the outlines of the chamber reappear, the bed, the walls, the ceiling beams all ordinary again. The princess exhales softly, turns onto her side, and lets sleep reclaim her. Outside, the wind howls anew, but it cannot breach her cocoon. The candle's death leaves a velvet darkness, thick, safe, endless. Somewhere in that blackness, she dreams on, guarded not by soldiers or steel, but by habit, hope, and the lingering warmth of light remembered. The castle exhales as the night deepens. What warmth remains flickers faintly at the edges of the room, and the princess drifts somewhere between sleep and waking. Down below, the vast corridors breathe with muted sound, steps, whispers, and the slow, rhythmic scraping of logs being dragged toward distant hearths. Because in a medieval fortress, sleep was not just for nobles. It was a luxury rationed among those who served them. You can almost hear her chambermaid stirring in the adjoining alcove. Wrapped in a threadbare cloak, she rises quietly, her breath ghosting in the air. The maid's night is not for dreaming. It is for keeping another's warmth alive. Surviving manuscripts tell us that castle servants had defined duties that extended deep into the night. One of the most trusted was the fire girl, or fille de feu, the young woman responsible for tending the embers in her mistress's chamber. While others slept, she kept vigil, feeding the fire at measured intervals so that no sudden cold would wake the lady she served. A lesser-known curiosity from household logs notes that these maids often carried a small handbell. The sound was not to wake their mistress, but to summon help if sparks leapt from the hearth. Fire was both necessity and threat, and its keeper walked a narrow line between gratitude and blame. The chambermaid now moves soundlessly across the floor, her bare feet padding against woven rushes. The embers pulse faintly, as though greeting her. She kneels, adds a small log, and blows gently. The wood catches, releasing a sigh of smoke that curls toward the ceiling. You can almost feel the temperature shift, a thin ribbon of warmth stretching toward the bed. No consensus has ever been reached about how often servants entered their mistresses' chambers after midnight. Some scholars argue that such constant presence ensured safety. Others believe the princess herself preferred solitude once asleep. Perhaps both are true, depending on the temperament of the household and of the woman beneath those quilts. The maid moves to the bedside, careful not to disturb the curtains. She touches them lightly, checking that the air within still feels warm. A flicker of candlelight illuminates her hands cracked from washing linens in icy water, rough but steady. She lingers for a moment, listening to her lady's breathing, then crosses to the table where the candle stubs sit in their holders. An endearing fragment of diary prose from a 15th century servant describes this moment vividly. The lady slept deep, and I feared to breathe too loud lest her dreams fly away. That quiet tenderness hums through the centuries, an intimacy of care that rarely found its way into chronicles. The princess stirs slightly, murmuring in her sleep. The maid freezes, waiting. When the silence returns, she exhales in relief. Her gaze drifts toward the frost-laced window, where moonlight pools like spilled milk. It's a cold world out there, unforgiving, endless, and yet her small labor has meaning here. To guard warmth is to guard life. Archaeological evidence suggests that some castles employed rotating shifts of attendants throughout the night, each responsible for a handful of rooms. These nocturnal workers, maids, pages, guards, formed a hidden network of movement beneath the sleeping household. Theirs was a life of quiet footsteps, whispered exchanges, and small kindnesses exchanged in passing. A peculiar superstition lingered among them. Never let a hearth die completely, or the castle's spirit would freeze. To prevent this, some maids left a single ember smouldering beneath ashes, whispering a prayer to Saint Bridget, patroness of fire and protection. Perhaps the maid here does the same, her lips moving soundlessly in the flickering light. You listen as she folds her arms, rubbing warmth into her hands. The faint crackle of the rekindled fire seems louder in the silence. Behind her, the bed curtains tremble slightly as the air stirs. She glances back, sees that her mistress sleeps still, and smiles. It's a small, private smile born of relief, pride, and exhaustion. Historians still puzzle over how much recognition these silent guardians received. Wages were modest, gratitude rare. Yet without them, the comforts of nobility would have vanished by dawn. Every glowing ember, every warm basin, every unburned curtain owes its life to their unseen patience. The maid adjusts the bedclothes folded at the foot of the bed, a pile of extra furs and linen, ready should the temperature drop further. She touches the edge of the princess's gown, rearranges it slightly, then turns away again. Her shadow flickers across the wall, joining the long parade of shadows that have kept company with royalty since castles first rose from the earth. One detail preserved in an old account mentions how some mistresses rewarded loyal maids with cast-off garments, silk sleeves, embroidered ribbons, fur trims salvaged from worn cloaks. You can picture this girl months from now, her coarse winter dress edged with remnants of royal fabric, carrying the warmth of this room into her own meagre quarters. The fire crackles brighter now, sending a new wave of heat across the stones. The maid watches for a moment longer, then bows her head in a small, habitual gesture of respect. She retreats to her stool by the door, drawing her cloak tightly around her. Sleep tempts her, but duty keeps her spine straight. Her eyelids flutter. The wind outside moans again, like an old beast turning in its sleep. It's generally accepted among historians of daily life that these overnight rituals, silent, repetitive, and unseen, were the glue that held medieval households together. Every luxury rested on invisible endurance. The princess may never remember this hour, but her comfort depends entirely on it. The maid's eyes drift toward the faint glow of dawn seeping through the shutters. Soon another servant will relieve her. For now, she watches the fire, listening to its slow song. You can almost feel her thoughts, a mixture of fatigue, quiet pride, and the fragile peace that comes when one has done something small, yet vital. The room warms again, slightly. The princess sighs softly in her sleep. The maid smiles once more and lets her head rest against the cold stone wall, just for a moment. The castle breathes, alive in its layers of silence, warmth, and loyalty. Dawn remains a rumour beyond the shuttered window. Inside, the fire hums low, and the chamber breathes in rhythm with its lady. Yet even as warmth clings to the air, the cold never truly loosens its grip. It lingers on the edges of the bed frame, in the joints of the fingers, in the lungs. The medieval night is never harmless. The princess stirs, her brow faintly damp. Sleep is uneasy in winter's domain. Her dreams shift between comfort and chill, body and mind wrestling in their own quiet war. Cold seeps into the bones differently here. It doesn't merely touch the skin, it steals into the blood. Archaeological evidence suggests that medieval people feared the cold not simply for its discomfort, but for its power to sicken. Bad air, they called it, foul humours, rising from the ground or creeping in through cracks. It was believed that cold could enter the body through breath or pores, unbalancing the delicate harmony of humours that governed health. An unexpected detail from monastic infirmaries reveals that doctors prescribed warming herbs like cinnamon and ginger, often mixed into wine, before sleep. For noble households, these concoctions became ritual, medicinal, and indulgent all at once. You can almost picture the princess sipping from a gilded cup, eyes half closed, the sweet spice curling through the air as her maid murmurs that it will keep her blood gentle through the night. Yet the line between remedy and superstition was thin. Some experts believe that these hot wines, meant to strengthen the heart, were more psychological than effective. Others argue they may have helped stave off the chills of respiratory illness common in stone-built fortresses. No one can say for certain. The past keeps its secrets close. The princess turns again, pulling the covers to her chin. Her breath comes uneven now, small tremors rising in her throat. Perhaps she's caught a touch of the cold that everyone in the castle dreads, the kind that begins with shivers and ends in fevered murmurs. Servants whisper of winter's bite, a sickness that steals even the strong. Chroniclers of the age noted that entire courts sometimes fell ill together during the deepest frosts. The air grew thick with smoke, the fires burned constantly, and yet the cold persisted in every breath. They didn't know of bacteria or viruses. They knew only that warmth was life, and its absence death. A peculiar practice found in old medical texts advises rubbing goose fat onto the chest before bed to seal the heat within. Some even added powdered saffron for royalty, a luxury turned into medicine. You imagine the maid performing this task tenderly, the smell of fat and spice clinging to her hands long after the ritual ends. The princess murmurs something faintly in her sleep, a prayer, or perhaps a memory. Her skin gleams faintly with sweat. The heat from the fire feels different now, less comforting, more oppressive. Her fever rises like dawn within her, hidden yet inexorable. Opinions differ among medical historians about how common such fevers truly were. Some argue that noble diets rich in meat and wine weakened the body against infection. Others point to damp stone chambers and smoky air as silent culprits. In any case, the cold was never just a season. It was an adversary, capable of slipping past silks and status alike. The maid, sensing the change, moves closer to the bed. She touches her mistress's forehead and frowns. The skin feels too warm. She dips a cloth in cool water, the surface trembling as she wrings it out. The scent of lavender still clings to the basin, masking the faint sourness of sickness. An amusing yet grim footnote in medical lore describes how some physicians of the era prescribed sleeping beside healthy companions to borrow their warmth and vigor. You can almost imagine the hush of the chamber as another. Lady-in-waiting lies beside the fevered princess, hoping her own steady breathing might coax the balance back. It's both absurd and profoundly human. The fire crackles again, louder this time, as if protesting the chill returning through the cracks of the world. The princess stirs, whispering something unintelligible. The maid listens but cannot catch the words. They sound like fragments of a lullaby, or perhaps a prayer she learned as a child. It's generally accepted among historians that medieval people believed fevered dreams could reveal truths or warnings. Some queens kept dream books by their bedside, recording symbols and visions as though they were divine messages. Perhaps the princess dreams of her ancestors tonight, faces flickering in the smoke, whispering of endurance, of spring, of survival. A lesser-known curiosity from noble medical accounts describes how rooms of the sick were filled with aromatic smoke juniper, myrrh, or vinegar, boiled with rosemary. It was thought to drive away plague or cold spirits. You can almost see the haze filling this chamber, the air turning gold and sweet, while servants fan it gently toward the bed. No one truly sleeps now. The maid moves quietly, the fire breathes uneasily, and the princess slips between consciousness and fever. Her lips part, whispering words that dissolve into sighs. Experts in medieval life note that cold and illness shaped not only medicine but psychology. Winter was both physical and spiritual, a test of faith, an annual reckoning. People prayed for warmth as they prayed for salvation, believing the two were intertwined. The maid wipes the princess's brow again, humming softly. The tune is old, older than the castle, older than the crown. Its melody winds through the flickering firelight like smoke, fragile but persistent. Slowly, the princess's breathing steadies. Outside, dawn is at last a faint smudge behind the frost. The cold hasn't vanished, it never does, but for now, the fever rests. The room smells of herbs and ash and weary hope. And in that fragile calm, you feel it, the heartbeat of survival, echoing through the walls. The night was cruel, but she endures, as all princesses must. The fever has broken by morning, though its ghost still lingers on the princess's skin. Her breath comes steady now, faint puffs of white against the frigid air. The first light of dawn creeps through the shutter cracks, spilling across the floor like thin ribbons of silver. For a few precious moments, the world holds its breath. The cold seems less cruel, the silence almost sacred. Her maid kneels beside the hearth, coaxing the embers back to life. Sparks flutter upward, gold dust rising toward the ceiling. The smell of ash and rosemary fills the air again. The princess stirs, her lashes trembling as she blinks into the dim light. Around her, the chamber feels half real, blurred by dreams and smoke. It's generally accepted among historians of medieval piety that no royal day began without prayer. Even before water or food, faith came first, an offering made before dawn fully claimed the sky. And in winter, when illness hovered near and warmth was fickle, prayer was more than ritual. It was a talisman against despair. The maid helps her sit upright, wrapping a fur shawl over her shoulders. The princess's voice, hoarse but gentle, murmurs the morning verse. God grant us warmth within and peace without. The words are simple, but they carry weight. Every syllable seems to still the air. One delightful oddity recorded in chapel accounts tells that royal households often sprinkled holy water not just on foreheads but over beds, windows and hearths before sleeping. It was believed to purify the air and guard against night demons. You can almost picture it, silver droplets falling into the fire, hissing softly as they vanish, leaving only the faint scent of sanctity. A debate still stirs among religious historians over whether these blessings were truly spiritual comfort or subtle control rituals designed to reinforce divine order within the home. Some claim that for noble women, daily devotion was both prayer and performance, a way of proving worthiness before heaven and court alike. Others see sincerity beneath the ceremony. The truth, perhaps, lies in the stillness of her eyes as she prays, no audience, no vanity, only breath and belief. The maid sets a small wooden cross beside the bed, polished smooth by countless hands. The princess traces its edge with her fingertip. Her voice softens into a whisper, private words for those who came before her, and for those yet to come. An unusual record from a 14th century devotional guide suggests that women often personalized their prayers with household imagery. "Bless this bed as thou blessest the manger," one line reads, "and grant that I wake as thou didst rise." It's easy to imagine her saying something similar each night, seeing in her humble chamber the echo of divine endurance. You notice how the morning light grows stronger now, catching in the threads of her canopy. Dust motes dance in it, soft and golden. The world feels fragile, almost holy. Perhaps that's why medieval people saw no divide between comfort and faith, between warming one's body and healing one's soul. A lesser-known curiosity in letters from noble women reveals that many kept small relics hidden near their pillows, fragments of saints' bones, pressed flowers from pilgrimages, or tiny coins blessed by priests. The princess reaches for such an object now, a delicate cloth pouch tied with silk string. Inside is a tiny silver charm, its surface worn smooth. She presses it to her lips, then lays it back beneath her pillow. Archaeological finds from royal tombs confirm this practice. Some of these tokens still rest beside skeletons, proof that faith followed them even beyond warmth, beyond time. The maid, meanwhile, lights a second candle, its flame taller and cleaner than the first. She moves with care, bowing her head as she places it near the window. The light spills over the frost-coated glass, mingling with the pale grey outside. Together, they create something almost beautiful: fire meeting winter, belief meeting inevitability. Experts remain divided on how personal faith truly was for women of her rank. Was it private devotion, or public expectation shaped by priests and fathers? Yet watching her now, bare shoulders wrapped in fur, hands clasped loosely, lips moving in soft rhythm, it's clear that belief has become more than obedience. It's a way to endure what cannot be changed. A lesser-remembered passage from a medieval homily urges, "Where the fire burns, keep your heart. Where the flame falters, breathe your prayer." The words might as well have been written for her. Each morning, each night, she balances on that edge between warmth and surrender, faith and fatigue. The fire brightens as she finishes. The cross gleams faintly. The air smells faintly of beeswax and cedar. The maid bows, murmuring her own prayer, and slips quietly from the room. The princess remains, eyes half closed, hands still folded. For a moment, she listens to the wind brushing the walls, to the quiet pulse of flame, to the silence that feels more alive than sound. The castle beyond these walls might still be waking, but here, time pauses. It's a peaceful kind of survival, the kind born not from defiance but from grace. And though the chill still prowls at the edges of her world, faith and fire hold their fragile truce. The princess breathes out, slow and steady, and for that heartbeat between night and day she feels something rare, warmth that has nothing to do with the body at all. The morning prayer fades into silence, leaving behind a hush that feels both comforting and strange. The princess sits still for a long time, letting the soundless air settle around her. The fire crackles softly, its glow tracing gold along the edges of her face. Yet as she listens, she realizes that the castle itself is never silent, it only pretends to be. From somewhere deep in the walls comes a low groan, the stone expanding and contracting with the shift of temperature. A distant drip echoes from the corridor where melted frost trickles from the ceiling. Somewhere above, a raven croaks, its call magnified by the emptiness of the towers. Sound moves differently here. It lingers, stretching and bending through the cold until it becomes something ghostly. Chroniclers of the age noted that castles were never quiet places, even at night. Stone walls carried voices, footsteps, and whispers far beyond their origin. To speak softly was to invite your words to travel. Privacy, even for a princess, was a fragile illusion. An unexpected curiosity from architectural studies describes how tapestries and rugs served not only to trap warmth, but to soften sound. The thicker the fabric, the more peaceful the room. In this sense, silence too was a luxury. Poorer dwellings echoed harshly. Noble ones hushed their noise with woven beauty. Specialists in medieval acoustics still puzzle over the peculiar soundscape of stone fortresses. Some argue that their echoing halls fostered superstition, amplifying ordinary noises into whispers of the uncanny. Others claim that those same sounds, the creaking wood, the far-off footsteps, offered comfort, proof that life still moved through the massive, sleeping structure. You listen as she does, letting the sounds layer one atop another, the soft hiss of the fire, the flutter of fabric in a faint draught, the muffled steps of servants below. The castle breathes like a sleeping creature, immense, restless, never fully still. The princess's gaze drifts toward the ceiling. She's learned to read the castle by ear, to distinguish friendly sounds from those that mean trouble. A sudden crack could signal ice shifting on the roof. A rolling thud might be a falling log in the great hall's hearth. She hears them all, half asleep, half aware, and her body has long since adjusted to this chorus of stone and air. A charming oddity preserved in letters from noble households reveals that some residents gave names to recurring sounds in their castles, the sire, for instance, for the moan of wind through a narrow chimney, or the walker, for the boards that creaked in the same pattern each night. By naming the noises, they tamed them, transforming fear into familiarity. You can imagine the princess smiling faintly as she hears the sire tonight whispering, "Good evening, old friend." Archaeological evidence from certain keeps shows narrow tubes or vents carved into thick walls, designed not for decoration but ventilation. In winter, these small openings carried every external sound inside: owls calling, trees cracking, snow sliding from roofs. To sleep in such a place was to exist halfway between the world of nature and the echo chamber of civilization. The princess moves slightly beneath her fur mantle, her ears alert though her eyes remain closed. She listens to the footsteps in the corridor outside, steady, measured, familiar. Likely one of the night guards ending his watch, boots thudding softly against stone. His steps fade, replaced by the faint clinking of a chain somewhere in the stairwell. A debate among social historians remains unresolved. Did people of her rank grow used to such constant noise, or did it fray the mind over time? Some diaries suggest noblewomen complained of sleeplessness and anxiety during long winters, when the sounds seemed amplified by isolation. Others describe the creaks and murmurs as oddly soothing evidence that their fortress still lived, that they were never truly alone. The fire pops loudly, startling the cat curled by the hearth. It lifts its head, ears twitching, eyes flashing green in the dimness. For a heartbeat, everything feels alive again. The walls, the floor, even the air itself humming faintly with the castle's pulse. Researchers widely agree that medieval architecture shaped the senses as much as it shaped daily life. To live surrounded by echoing chambers and heavy doors meant perceiving space differently. Every sound became a signal, every silence a sign. The princess, wrapped in her furs, has learned this language. She knows when to trust a noise, when to ignore it, when to whisper a prayer. An amusing yet telling anecdote survives in the memoirs of a 15th century lady. She claimed that she could tell who walked past her chamber by the rhythm of their steps alone. Servants, knights, and visitors each made their own pattern on the floor. The princess here likely possesses the same skill, her ear tuned to the subtleties of those who live in her shadow. You begin to hear what she hears: the groan of timbers overhead, the faint scratch of mice behind the wall, the subtle whine of the wind through the arrow slit. Yet instead of fear, it brings calm. The repetition creates rhythm, and rhythm becomes reassurance. No one slept in silence in a medieval castle. Silence was for the dead, and the living found peace in sound, the steady murmur of existence continuing against the odds. The princess shifts again, pulling the covers close, the whisper of cloth almost blending with the sighing wind. Experts of medieval domestic life note that this awareness of sound shaped faith as well. Bells marked every hour, hymns echoed through chapels, even prayers were spoken aloud. Sound tied people to their world, to each other, and to their gods. To listen was to live. The princess finally closes her eyes, soothed not by quiet, but by familiarity. The noises of her world, the creaking beams, the distant voices, the restless fire become her lullaby. They remind her that she is not alone, that life still moves in the great cold. And as you listen with her, the castle's breath steadies, its heart of stone and fire beating once more in time with hers. The cold has no power here, not while sound fills the dark with memory and meaning. The first rays of dawn barely touch the highest tower before the castle begins to wake. Yet in the princess's chamber, warmth lingers like a promise kept through the long night. Beneath her layers of fur and linen, she stirs, blinking slowly. The faint light creeping through the curtains paints everything in shades of silver and pale rose. The fire has dwindled to grey embers, but still, the room holds a ghost of heat proof that the night's guardians did their work well. She stretches delicately, careful not to disturb the quiet, and listens. Footsteps echo distantly from the hallway. Servants beginning their morning rounds. A door creaks. Someone coughs. Life resumes, one sound at a time. And yet, for all her privilege, the princess is not alone in her chamber. Researchers widely agree that in medieval castles, solitude was an extravagance reserved for no one. Even royalty shared their most private spaces. A princess's bedchamber was a small ecosystem, a world filled with motion, whispers, and the soft rustle of duty. An unexpected record from a 15th-century household manual explains that a noblewoman's room could contain several attendants sleeping nearby, a lady-in-waiting, a personal maid, and sometimes a wet nurse if children were present. Add to that the fire girl, the guard outside the door, and a messenger or two waiting in the corridor, and the illusion of privacy vanishes entirely. A peculiar detail preserved in French court etiquette describes that attendants were trained to move silently, to exist in the background like ghosts. They mastered the art of invisibility, serving, observing, protecting while never intruding. Still, their presence was constant, even in the most intimate hours. It's generally accepted among historians of courtly life that true privacy, as we understand it, did not exist for women of power. Letters were read aloud, meals were shared publicly, even prayer and sleep took place under the watchful eyes of others. A princess's comfort was woven from the same fabric as surveillance, each stitch a reminder that her body and her life were not entirely her own. An unusual account from a royal attendant's diary confides, "Her Grace desired quiet, but quiet cannot be had when 10 hearts beat near one fire." You can almost see it, the crowded warmth of the chamber, where each breath and movement creates an invisible weave of sound and duty. The princess sits up now, drawing her shawl around her shoulders. Her hair falls loose, dark against the pale fabric of her nightgown. 2 attendants rise immediately from their pallets near the hearth, one stifling a yawn, the other already reaching for the basin and pitcher. Their devotion feels automatic, a choreography rehearsed every morning. The first servant brings warm water, steam curling in the cold air. The second kneels to rekindle the fire, her fingers moving deftly through ash and coal. The smell of smoke returns, mingling with the faint sweetness of rose oil stored in small ceramic pots. The chamber, once the stage of solitude and dream, becomes a hive of quiet labor once more. A delightful eccentricity mentioned in a royal ordinance describes that noble women often conversed softly with their attendants during these early hours, not about politics or alliances, but about dreams. "Tell me what your eyes saw, and I shall tell you mine," one princess reportedly said each morning. In such confessions, the walls of hierarchy thinned, and the human need for warmth of heart as much as body was briefly shared. Some scholars argue that this constant company offered safety, comfort, even companionship in a world where isolation could breed fear. Others note that it erased individuality, making every waking moment a performance. The princess's sigh as she watches her attendants move might be both gratitude and longing for a moment, perhaps, to wake to silence and belong only to herself. Archaeological findings from preserved chambers reveal how spatial design enforced this shared existence. The lady's bed stood in the room's warmest corner, while her attendants slept near the door or hearth. Curtains divided them, but never sealed them off. Even the thin partition of fabric could not silence the soft symphony of human presence, breath, whispers, and the rhythmic crackle of the fire. One small, charming practice recorded in English estates tells that attendants kept their shoes off after nightfall to avoid disturbing their mistress. They padded barefoot through the rushes, toes numb but steps soundless. In such gestures, service became devotion, and silence itself a gift. The princess dips her fingers into the warm water. Steam glides upward, kissing her cheeks with fleeting comfort. For the first time since the night began, she feels the chill retreat from her bones. She closes her eyes and breathes deeply. The sound of the fire returning to life joins the shuffle of her attendants preparing her gown, and the world feels complete again, alive, humming, expectant. No consensus exists among historians on whether noble women resented or cherished this constant proximity. Some letters hint at exhaustion from endless attention, others reveal affection, even friendship. The princess, in her quiet smile as she accepts a towel, seems to inhabit both feelings at once, a woman grateful for hands that serve her, yet weary of never being unseen. An endearing fragment from a surviving letter describes how one duchess likened her attendants to sparrows that perch near, chattering warmth into the morning. You can almost hear them now, whispering softly to each other as they lay out her garments, their voices rising and falling like the wind itself. The chamber is brightening. Frost outside glows silver white, and the first true warmth of day slips through the shutters. The princess glances toward the light, her expression serene, almost wistful. Around her, the air is full of soft sounds, fabrics rustling, fire breathing, slippers brushing against stone. And in that small, crowded warmth, you understand something profound. In her world, companionship is not interruption but survival. To be surrounded is to be safe, to be heard even in silence, to belong in the chorus of human breath that keeps the winter away. The princess turns her face toward the window, and for the briefest moment, sunlight touches her cheek. The cold waits patiently beyond the walls, but inside, life hums softly on, woven from warmth, voices, and the quiet rhythm of shared existence. The fire burns stronger now, its glow spilling across the stones like melted amber. The princess's attendants have departed to prepare her morning robe, and for the first time in hours, she is alone, or as close to alone as a royal woman can ever be. The air carries that rare, fleeting stillness after motion, the kind that hums with the memory of footsteps just gone. She exhales, shoulders softening, and lets her gaze wander around the room. Her eyes linger on the far wall, where two wooden panels stand slightly misaligned. They look like ordinary joinery, part of the chamber's carved wainscot, but she knows better. Behind them lies one of the castle's many secrets, a narrow corridor, hidden between the walls, built for passage and protection. In winter, these passageways breathe cold air like lungs, exhaling drafts through unseen seams. Architectural surveys of surviving castles confirm that such hidden spaces were common in the upper towers. They served a dozen purposes: escape routes in siege, shortcuts for servants, or private entrances for discreet visits. Yet in winter, they also acted as invisible enemies of warmth, funneling chill air through the very walls meant to keep it out. A peculiar finding from excavations at Hedingham Castle revealed traces of soot and wax deep within such hidden stairways, proof that servants once carried lamps through them in the night. You can almost imagine the glow of those candles flickering along damp stone, the faint rustle of wool skirts brushing walls unseen. The princess rises, curiosity stirring. Her bare feet touch the rushes, still faintly warm from the fire. She crosses the chamber, fingers brushing along the wooden panel. The seam gives a soft sigh as it opens just enough to let a current of air whisper through. It smells of earth and stone, old smoke and secrets. One historian describes these corridors as the castle's veins, carrying both breath and rumour. Through them travelled servants, guards, and sometimes it was whispered, lovers. In such narrow spaces, alliances could form as quietly as footsteps. The princess has heard those stories since childhood, the kind told by maids in whispers, half terrifying, half thrilling. A lesser-known curiosity preserved in a 14th century household rulebook forbade servants from using secret doors between the royal chambers after dark, under pain of dismissal. The reasoning, it said, was not for suspicion of sin, but for draughts that chill the blood. The line has always amused her. Whether true or not, the cold made an excellent accomplice for discretion. She closes the panel again, feeling the breath of the hidden corridor fade. The air warms immediately, though faintly. She rubs her hands together and returns to the hearth, her gown whispering against the floor. Some scholars of medieval domestic design still debate whether these concealed spaces were truly practical or more symbols of status proof that one could afford mystery as well as masonry. Others believe they were remnants of an older instinct to keep escape close, even in safety. In either case, they shaped how a castle breathed, both literally and metaphorically. The princess sits before the fire and stares into its heart. The flames reflect in her eyes, twin sparks of orange and gold. She remembers how, as a child, she feared the noises behind the walls, the faint thumps and sighs that came from those narrow gaps. Her nurse would laugh softly, saying, "It's only the stone stretching its bones." But sometimes, when she was very still, she thought she heard whispers. You can imagine it now, the soft scrape of shoes, the distant rattle of a latch, the echo of movement somewhere just beyond sight. The castle is full of thresholds between seen and unseen, between warmth and cold. It teaches its inhabitants to listen more than to look. One fascinating architectural detail recovered from northern keeps shows that many secret passages were lined not with smooth stone but with unfinished rubble, rough surfaces that trapped cold air. On bitter nights, that chill bled through into nearby rooms, creating strange temperature shifts. A noblewoman might sit by her fire and feel one shoulder grow suddenly cold, as if touched by an invisible hand. No wonder the walls birthed so many ghost stories. An amusing little superstition that grew around these passages held that knocking 3 times on a hidden door before bed would keep restless spirits quiet. Some noble families even sealed unused corridors with holy symbols carved into wax, believing the cold itself was a haunting presence. Whether faith or fear, both warmed the mind against uncertainty. The princess takes a deep breath, feeling the contrast, the radiant heat from the fire before her, and the faint, icy pulse behind the wall. The sensation is almost comforting, a reminder that warmth means nothing without cold pressing against it. It's generally accepted among architectural historians that medieval design was as much psychological as functional. Walls were never barriers alone, they were narratives. Each door, stair, and hidden opening told a story about fear, power, or hope. You can see it in the way the princess moves, not afraid of the secret door, but aware of its presence, as one might be of a sleeping animal nearby. A peculiar letter from a 15th century mason describes his pride in building a passage none but the wind shall know. It's a phrase that could describe this whole castle, a place built to contain both people and the elements, both whispers and silence. The princess rises again, pulling her shawl tighter. The firelight brushes her face, revealing the calm steadiness of someone who has learned to coexist with uncertainty. The panel remains closed, its edges seamless once more. Yet she knows it's there, and somehow that knowledge is a kind of warmth too, an understanding that every fortress holds its ghosts, and not all are to be feared. Outside, the wind sighs against the tower walls. Inside, the flames answer in kind, their rhythm steady, patient, alive. And as she returns to her chair, the castle settles around her once more, stone over air, warmth over chill, secrets folded neatly behind the walls. The morning has ripened into a pale, pearly light. Beyond the window, snow drifts lazily across the courtyard, swirling in slow arcs that catch the Sunday. Inside, the princess sits by the hearth, a cup of spiced wine warming her hands. The firelight paints her cheeks pink, though the air around her still holds a lingering crispness. She exhales, watching her breath ghost faintly in front of her. For a moment, you might think she's simply savoring the warmth, but in truth, she's thinking, wondering, as countless others did before her, what warmth really is. Chroniclers of natural philosophy tell us that medieval thinkers believed heat came from within the body, governed by the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. To sleep too cold or too hot, they said, would throw these elements out of harmony. The ideal night was one in which the fire within matched the fire without. You can almost hear the physicians muttering by torchlight, debating how much wood a princess should burn or how many blankets she should bear. A small but curious note in a physician's ledger from the 13th century describes how noblewomen were instructed to eat warming foods, ginger, garlic, cloves, even pepper before bed to stoke their internal fire. You imagine the taste of such a meal lingering in the princess's mouth: sweet wine, hot spice, and the faint metallic trace of the goblet's rim. Experts still debate whether these medieval theories of heat and humours had any real physiological merit. Some modern scholars argue that they were early attempts to describe metabolism and circulation in poetic language. Others claim the focus on balance and environment reflected a deeper understanding of seasonal adaptation, primitive perhaps, but intuitive. The princess tilts her cup, watching the thin line of steam rise and vanish. To her, the idea of warmth is not theoretical, it is deeply personal. She feels it as both presence and absence, a rhythm within her body that mirrors the world outside. When she steps too close to the fire, her skin prickles and flushes. When she leans away, the chill reclaims her instantly. The balance is delicate, and she's learned to treat it almost like prayer. One delightful eccentricity preserved in monastic records mentions warming stones, flat pieces of granite heated in the hearth and wrapped in cloth, carried to bed to rest by one's feet. Unlike the dangerous bed-warming pans of coals, these stones gave steady heat that cooled slowly through the night. Some monasteries even assigned a monk the title Custos Lapidum, or Keeper of the Stones. You can imagine a similar ritual here in the castle: servants fetching glowing rocks from the fire, wrapping them carefully, and placing them beneath her quilts like sleeping animals. A letter from a learned abbess describes warmth as a divine metaphor. As the fire quickens flesh, so too does grace quicken the soul. It's not hard to see why such comparisons flourished. Fire, after all, was mystery made visible alive, consuming, transforming. To tend it well was both duty and devotion. The princess leans forward slightly, holding her hand above the flames. The skin glows gold, the veins beneath faintly blue. She flexes her fingers, watching the play of light. Her physician once told her that healthy hands should always feel warm to the touch. Cold fingertips, he warned, were a sign of sluggish humours. She's not sure if that's true, but it gives her comfort to think her body still holds the spark it needs. A peculiar superstition whispered among castle servants claimed that the hearth's heat came not from the wood, but from the spirit of the flame itself, a small soul bound to service. Each time the fire was fed, they murmured thanks, lest it grow sullen and fade. The princess finds herself doing the same, sometimes an unconscious nod to the flicker that keeps her alive. It's generally accepted among historians of medieval medicine that temperature, health, and morality were seen as intertwined. The body in balance was a moral one. Excess heat or cold suggested sin or indulgence. To shiver was a sign of weakness, but to sweat in winter hinted at pride. Comfort was not simply physical, it was spiritual equilibrium, achieved through discipline and moderation. An unexpected note from an Italian physician records a prescription for winter melancholy. Sleep near the hearth, think on sweet things, and breathe of rosemary. The simplicity of that advice feels timeless. The princess, sitting quietly in her tower, could have been his patient. Her world might be centuries away, but her needs remain human: to feel safe, to be warm, to believe in balance. She shifts slightly, glancing toward the frost-flecked window. The world outside glitters like crushed glass. From this distance, the cold looks almost beautiful, its cruelty disguised in brightness. She knows better. She's seen servants limp from frostbitten mornings, heard the stables echo with coughing men. Warmth, she thinks, is not just comfort, it is hierarchy, a line drawn by firelight. Archaeological findings from preserved castles support this notion. Rooms nearest the hearth were prized territory. Those who slept near walls faced the cold's invasion. Even within the same fortress, temperature was a map of privilege. The princess has never forgotten that truth, even as she enjoys its advantage. A charming passage from a medieval household guide suggests hanging mirrors near fires to double the light and warmth. It was more illusion than science, but the act itself was poetic, a small defiance of limitation. You can almost picture her now, tilting the silver mirror toward the flames, watching the reflection dance across the opposite wall, filling the room with multiplied glow. Some specialists argue that these beliefs about heat reveal how medieval people perceived their relationship with nature, not as conquerors, but as collaborators. They sought not to master cold, but to coexist with it through ritual and respect. The princess, sipping the last of her spiced wine, understands this intuitively. She places the empty cup aside and extends her feet toward the fire. The soles of her slippers glow faintly red in the warmth. Outside, snow falls thicker now, blurring the line between ground and sky. Inside, the castle hums quietly, its many fires alive, each one a heartbeat in the body of stone. The princess closes her eyes. She feels the heat rise from the hearth, the faint pulse beneath her skin, and something unspoken connects the two. For a brief, fragile moment, she is perfectly balanced between inside and out, between knowledge and belief, between survival and grace. The scent of cloves still lingers on her lips as she sets aside the silver cup. The warmth from the spiced wine has traveled through her veins, leaving behind a gentle hum beneath her skin. Morning has fully broken now, though the sun outside is pale and cold, a white eye in a grey sky. The world looks brittle, like a frost-covered glass sculpture. The servants have returned, bustling quietly with trays of food. Steam rises from a small bowl of pottage grain thickened with milk and honey, and beside it, a plate of bread still warm from the kitchen hearth. A curl of butter gleams golden against its crust. The princess takes one slow bite, the taste earthy and comforting. Her stomach answers with a low murmur of approval. Documents from noble estates confirm that breakfast, when taken at all, was simple for royalty: soft bread, ale or watered wine, and occasionally fruit or porridge. It was less a meal than a ritual, something to coax the body gently into wakefulness. The true feast came later, at midday. But during long winters, even the smallest meal could mean the difference between vigor and fatigue. A peculiar dietary belief of the era held that certain foods could kindle or smother inner heat. Meat and spice were considered hot, while fish and vegetables cooled the humors. To eat unwisely before sleep, physicians warned, was to invite restless dreams or a chilled spirit. You imagine the princess weighing each bite at supper, deciding whether to court comfort or caution. An amusing little custom from courtly households suggests that noblewomen sometimes placed their hands above steaming dishes before eating, letting the heat seep into their fingers. Warmth was precious, even borrowed second-hand. The princess does the same now, watching wisps of steam curl into the air like pale ribbons of silk. Some experts argue that food rituals in medieval courts were less about nourishment and more about symbolism, proof of order in a chaotic world. Eating slowly, deliberately, mirrored the rhythm of prayer. Each taste, each sip, was a quiet claim against the cold's indifference. The princess takes another bite, savoring the grain's texture, the faint sweetness of honey. Around her, her attendants tidy the chamber, folding bed linens, sweeping stray ash from the hearth, and shaking out the rushes on the floor. The steady rhythm of their work fills the silence. A charming note from a chronicler of Burgundy mentions that noble women often gave small leftovers, crumbs, crusts, or cooling porridge to their pets after breakfast. It wasn't just affection, it was considered good fortune to share warmth with the lesser. The princess breaks off a piece of bread now and tosses it gently to the cat curled near the hearth. It blinks at her, yawns, and accepts the offering as if it were tribute. Opinions differ among social historians about whether these gestures reflected compassion or performance. Some see them as rituals of humility, carefully displayed for servants and scribes to note. Others believe they sprang from genuine tenderness, the quiet acknowledgement that warmth shared is warmth multiplied. Perhaps both interpretations are true. The princess wipes her hands and leans back in her chair. Her maid brings a clean cloth scented faintly of rosemary. As the princess dabs at her lips, the aroma drifts upward, cutting through the heavier smells of wood and smoke. It's a small, intimate moment of grace, the collision of earth and elegance. Researchers widely agree that winter diets in castles were heavily dependent on preservation. Salted meats, dried legumes, stored grain, and the occasional luxury of imported spice. These foods filled bellies but seldom comforted the spirit. That's why spices, however rare, carried such prestige they offered a taste of sunlight in months ruled by shadow. A fascinating ledger from the English royal household lists shipments of cinnamon, cloves, and pepper arriving by ship from Venice each winter. These were locked away in iron-bound chests, portioned carefully by the steward. A few pinches of spice could cost a month's wages for a servant, yet for the princess, they were ordinary as snow. The irony is not lost on her. As she tastes the last drop of honeyed milk, she thinks of the villages beyond the castle walls of peasants waking to frozen fields, breaking the ice atop their water pails, chewing hard crusts of rye. Her comfort rests on invisible labor, warmth purchased with the world's imbalance. A delightful fragment from a surviving letter written by a noblewoman to her confessor reads, "I eat while others freeze, I sleep while others pray for dawn, yet I cannot taste without their ghosts beside me." The princess may never have written such words, but perhaps she's thought them. The fire in her hearth burns bright, but its reflection in her eyes is softer now, tinged with something like humility. Some modern historians still discuss whether nobility felt empathy for those beneath them, or viewed their warmth as divine right. The truth, like heat itself, may have flickered. There were rulers who gave blankets to the poor, and others who built bigger hearths instead. Human warmth, it seems, has always been unevenly distributed. The princess rises, her robe whispering against the floor. The fire sighs as she steps closer, holding her palms toward it. Behind her, the empty bowl gleams faintly in the light, the remnants of her meal already cooling. She can feel both gratitude and guilt settle quietly in her chest, two emotions that, like hot and cold, rarely live apart. A peculiar superstition recorded in country folklore held that sharing one's meal with a beggar ensured mild weather for the next 3 days. Perhaps that's why she sometimes sends food to the gatehouse at dusk, though she tells no one. The gesture is small, nearly invisible, but it carries the warmth she cannot give through speech. The maid approaches again with a cloak, fur-lined and heavy. The princess slips into it, the weight both comforting and sobering. The morning has moved fully into being now. Outside, the cold remains implacable, a white ocean pressing against the walls. Inside, the air glows faintly golden, filled with the soft smell of breakfast, of fire, of humanity. And as she turns toward the window, watching her breath meet the glass, you realize this simple truth. Warmth is never just heat. It's an exchange between body and world, between privilege and mercy, between what is kept and what is given. The world outside the castle lies still beneath its frozen veil, but within these thick walls, warmth carries its own mysteries. The princess has finished her modest breakfast, yet her thoughts linger elsewhere on the flickering line between waking and dreaming. She sits quietly before the fire, hands clasped, the last traces of sleep still clinging to her. Her dreams have been strange lately, vivid and persistent, as though the cold itself is whispering through them. Records from court physicians mention that the chill of winter was often blamed for disordered dreams. Cold, they said, constricted the humours, stifling the heart's heat and sending the mind wandering through shadowed paths. People of the time believed dreams were more than imagination. They were messages, sometimes divine, sometimes dangerous. A lesser-known curiosity from a 14th century dream book instructs, should you dream of fire, your body seeks warmth; of snow, your spirit longs for purity. The princess remembers such sayings from childhood, when her nurse would listen to her morning stories and nod gravely, declaring each vision a prophecy. Some experts argue that medieval dream culture offered emotional freedom to those bound by etiquette. In waking life, a princess obeyed. In dreams, she might rule. Others claim these interpretations were merely tools of control, ways to turn even sleep into moral instruction. Whichever is true, she feels their grip still, centuries later in her own half-lucid mind. The princess wraps her shawl tighter. The memory of last night's fever still haunts her in flashes. A burning hall, voices calling her name, frost creeping through the cracks in her reflection. She shivers, though the room is warm. It was only a dream, she murmurs, half to herself, half to the fire. But dreams in this age are not easily dismissed. A letter preserved in the archives of a French abbess tells of noble women who kept small journals by their beds to record their nightly visions. Each morning they consulted priests or scholars who claimed to interpret the symbols. White doves meant peace, dark water meant deceit, and warmth that fades meant warning. It's easy to imagine the princess doing the same, her neat handwriting crossing the page like threads in a tapestry of sleep. An amusing fragment of folklore insists that certain herbs, particularly valerian and mugwort, could invite pleasant dreams if placed under one's pillow. Her maid, ever faithful, still follows that old wisdom, tucking small sachets between the sheets. The scent, faint and bitter, clings to the room long after dawn. Researchers widely agree that medieval people considered dreaming a bridge between body and soul. What one saw at night revealed not only divine will, but the hidden state of one's health. To dream of warmth was blessing. To dream of endless snow foretold weakness or death. The princess has dreamt both. She leans toward the fire, watching the coals pulse with quiet life. The glow fascinates her, the way it breathes, the way it mimics thought. She wonders if the mind, too, holds embers that never truly die, even when the world turns cold. A charming little superstition recorded in household chronicles advises that, upon waking, one should whisper a blessing to the hearth. May my dreams stay warm as thee. The logic was simple. Fire guarded both the flesh and the imagination. The princess, remembering, smiles faintly and whispers the words. Some scholars debate whether such rituals arose from faith or fear. To modern eyes they seem quaint, yet in the echoing silence of a castle winter, where wind moans through cracks like unseen voices, small gestures become anchors of sanity. She knows this, instinctively. Every prayer, every whisper, every routine keeps her tethered to something solid. The cat stretches by the fire, yawning wide. Its tail flicks lazily against the rushes, and the princess laughs softly. The sound surprises her. It's light, fragile, but real. Even laughter feels sacred here, a flare of human heat against the immensity of stone. Archaeological evidence suggests that even within these fortified walls, people sought ways to make the night less lonely. They sang lullabies to the fire, told ghost stories, recited poems about spring's return. Warmth, they believed, could be summoned not only through flame but through voice and imagination. The princess thinks of the song she heard as a child, sung by her nurse while brushing her hair. The melody comes back now, faint as snowflakes. Cold shall sleep when hearts stay near. She hums it under her breath, her voice almost blending with the sigh of the fire. An unexpected note from a 15th century confessor's diary reveals his unease about such nighttime songs. He feared they mixed pagan memory with Christian devotion, turning faith into comfort too human, too sensual. Yet perhaps that was their power to make holiness feel like warmth rather than fear. The princess finishes the tune and rests her chin on her hand. Outside, the wind rises again, brushing the shutters like a hand against fabric. She imagines the snow beyond, piling high on the battlements, muting the world into silence. Inside, the chamber glows with fragile life, a tiny sun in a land of frost. Some researchers remain divided on whether medieval dreams were truly believed to predict fate or merely mirror desire. Either way, they carried weight. To dream of warmth was to remember the body. To dream of cold was to feel the world's indifference. The princess has dreamt both, and perhaps that balance keeps her sane. She closes her eyes again, not to sleep, but to linger in the space between dreams and waking, where everything feels possible and nothing hurts. The fire hums softly. The scent of mugwort and smoke curls around her like a cloak. Her thoughts drift not toward fear this time, but toward curiosity. In her mind, warmth has become its own language, the language of survival, of memory, of spirit. She smiles faintly and whispers, "May the night remember me kindly." And though the day has barely begun, the words feel like a promise to herself, to the flame, and to the cold that always waits outside. The day outside drifts toward noon, but sunlight in winter feels more like memory than presence. Its rays brush the frost and vanish before they can soften it. Inside, the castle breathes slow and steady, its rhythm dictated by the crackle of fires and the measured pace of footsteps on stone. The princess sits near her chamber window, wrapped in her fur-lined mantle, watching the snow settle on the courtyard below. From here, she can see the servants crossing from the kitchens, their cloaks flaring behind them like wings. The faintest trail of smoke rises from the bakehouse chimney, curling upward into the pale sky. She wonders how it smells bread and soot, maybe a hint of wood ash. Warmth, in its simplest form. Archaeological studies of castle life confirm that kitchens were often the true heart of winter survival. While the great hall roared with ceremony and the private chambers shimmered with quiet refinement, it was the kitchens that produced the heat, the labor, the life that kept everything else alive. A delightful curiosity preserved in a steward's record tells that the kitchen hearths never went cold, not even for a single night. They burned ceaselessly through the season, tended by cooks and scullions who slept on benches beside them. For many, the kitchen's fire was the only warmth they ever knew. Experts remain divided on how well that heat travelled through the castle's cold arteries. Some claim clever architects carved flues and vents through floors, letting warmth rise into upper rooms. Others believe most of that life-giving heat never left the kitchens at all, trapped among pots, pans, and weary bodies huddled near the coals. The princess often imagines it: the roar of flames, the hiss of dripping fat, the clang of ladles against iron, the sounds of necessity rather than luxury. Her meals arrive on silver trays, but each bite carries the labor of unseen hands scorched and blistered by fire. An unexpected letter from a cook in a noble household reveals a rare intimacy. When the lady dines in comfort, I feel I have won a battle against the cold. That sentence, written with pride and exhaustion, might have come from any of the men and women below her now. The thought humbles her. She presses her fingers to the window pane. The glass feels shockingly cold, a reminder of the separation between her world and theirs. Yet even through the frost, she can sense the pulse of life below the laughter, the motion, the firelight spilling from open doorways. Warmth, she realizes, is communal. It travels by breath, by touch, by work. A peculiar superstition found in peasant folklore claims that kitchen fires carried the spirit of the home itself. If the flame ever died completely, the family's fortune would fade with it. To prevent this, a coal was always kept alive, tucked under ash until morning. In great castles, perhaps, that same superstition lived on disguised as protocol. Fire never dies here. It is simply moved, like royalty itself, from room to room. The princess watches as two boys carry a bucket of glowing embers toward the servants' quarters. The light trails behind them like molten thread. She wonders if they feel powerful, carrying warmth through the veins of the castle like messengers of the Sunday. Chroniclers of medieval domestic life often wrote that a well-run household was measured not by splendor, but by heat. Better a warm stone than a cold jewel, one proverb says. And indeed, a castle's true wealth could be felt, not seen the steady comfort of rooms that resisted the endless winter. An amusing fragment from a 14th century kitchen account mentions that cooks would sometimes warm their hands over pots of stew and mutter, "Bless the lady's appetite." Each meal was its own small prayer for continued employment and continued heat. The princess smiles faintly at the image human hope disguised as hospitality. Some social historians argue that this distribution of warmth symbolized the medieval social order itself. Those nearest the fire labored, those furthest enjoyed the reward. The princess, gazing out at the snow again, feels that truth acutely. She can trace the path of heat from the kitchen to her table, from her hearth to her bed, every step lined with hands that never rest. She turns from the window and sits once more by her fire. The air here feels different, perfumed, quiet, controlled. Yet she can't help thinking that the truest warmth, the kind that hums against the skin and seeps into the bones, exists not in these chambers, but in the chaos below. Laughter mingled with smoke, arguments softened by shared labor. A curious passage from an Italian treatise on household harmony declares, "The lady's chamber is where warmth is kept, the kitchen is where warmth is born." The princess repeats the line under her breath, almost as a confession. It's generally accepted among scholars that such reflections on domestic heat reveal more than practical truth. They show how people understood connection. To be warm was to be part of something larger, something living. Isolation was the coldest state of all. The princess rises and walks to her writing desk. She dips her quill, the ink cold and thick, and begins a letter to her steward. See that extra wood be sent to the kitchens, and that those who serve through the night be fed well. Fire is their burden, and our blessing both. When she seals the parchment, the wax drips crimson and glows like a coal before hardening. She blows gently on it and smiles. Somewhere deep in the castle, another fire cracks and flares, as though answering her gesture. Outside, the snow continues to fall, silent and endless. Inside, the balance holds, cold and warmth, labor and grace. The seen and the unseen all bound together by the steady rhythm of the hearths that never sleep. The afternoon light slants across the chamber now, thin and hesitant. Outside, the snowstorm has eased into a steady drift, blanketing the courtyard so completely that the world seems to have no edges. Inside, the castle is quiet again, its fires steady, its air heavy with a peace that feels almost sacred. The princess sits by her window seat, gazing out into the pale brightness. The glass fogs each time she exhales. Below, the courtyard looks like a dream of silence. No color, no movement, just white upon white. Yet every so often, a gust of wind stirs loose snow from the battlements, sending it spinning like powdered stars. She watches, entranced, tracing the snow's dance with her fingertip on the cold pane. Chroniclers of the age often describe snow as both blessing and omen. When the world wears white, one monk wrote, God hides its wounds. In winter, the castle becomes both fortress and tomb, holding its inhabitants in a slow, meditative stillness. One delightful curiosity recorded in a 13th century weather journal claims that noblewomen sometimes collected the first snowfall in silver bowls to melt and use for washing their faces. Snow water, they believed, purified the skin and brightened the spirit. The princess smiles faintly at the memory of her maid, once suggesting the same. She declined, laughing that the snow was too beautiful to spoil. Some scholars of medieval symbolism still argue whether snow represented purity or peril. To some, it mirrored divine peace. To others, it was a reminder of mortality, a soft shroud cast across the earth. The princess understands both readings intimately. Snow makes her world beautiful, but it also silences it. It reminds her that even luxury can feel like exile. She draws her shawl tighter and turns toward the fire. The flames seem smaller now, dwarfed by the pallid glow from the window. For a moment, she feels torn between two lights, the warmth of the hearth and the cold brilliance of the snow. Both are mesmerizing. Both hold her captive. Researchers widely agree that the medieval fascination with winter landscapes inspired not fear but awe. Paintings, manuscripts, and poetry of the time often portrayed snow as the great equalizer, rich and poor, castle and cottage, all subdued under one soft weight. The world's colors dimmed, its sounds hushed, and in that stillness, people saw reflection of faith, of patience, of fragility. A lesser-known letter from an English duchess mentions how she would sit for hours watching snow fall, calling it the silence that prays. The princess would understand that phrase. The way the flakes move slow, graceful, tireless, feels like devotion made visible. She rises and walks toward the window again. The glass is rimmed with frost that glitters faintly in the firelight. She places her palm against it. It bites with cold. The contrast between skin and glass, life and stillness, sends a shiver through her arm that is not unpleasant. An unexpected detail from travelers' journals notes that castles in northern climates often had double shutters, wooden panels lined with fabric or fur to trap warmth. But during daylight, they were left open despite the cold, simply to let the occupants remember there was a world beyond their walls. Light, like warmth, was survival. It's generally accepted among medieval historians that winter days within castles followed a slower rhythm. Fewer duties, fewer visitors, more inward thought. People read, sewed, prayed, and listened. The princess, though surrounded by attendants and luxury, feels that rhythm tug at her now, the deep, reflective quiet that settles when there is nowhere to go but inward. A peculiar superstition from Alpine folklore held that if one spoke harshly while it snowed, the snow would remember and return as a storm. The princess thinks of this as she whispers softly to herself, her words gentle, careful, like offerings to the air. Let the cold rest. Let the walls hold. Let this peace remain. Archaeological records show that many castles featured small alcoves by the windows, cushioned with wool and fur, where ladies sat to embroider or read. The princess lowers herself into her own seat, a thick cushion beneath her, a book of psalms in her lap. Her fingers trace the faded gold letters, not reading, just feeling the grooves left by the monk's careful hand. A charming fragment from an illuminated manuscript depicts women stitching by candlelight, their faces serene, their eyes lowered. The artist added faint halos above their heads, blurring the line between piety and domesticity. The princess smiles at the thought how the ordinary became sacred when done with quiet grace. She glances up again, and the snow continues to fall, each flake unique, each destined to vanish. There is something soothing in that inevitability. For all her wealth, she too is part of that rhythm, momentary, fragile, destined to melt into history. Some experts in medieval spirituality claim that winter encouraged this awareness of impermanence. When the world outside froze, people turned inward, not only for warmth but for meaning. Castles became monasteries of thought. Queens and princesses became their own quiet contemplatives. The princess folds her hands over her book and closes her eyes. She imagines the snow outside piling against the tower, layer upon layer, until even the sound of wind fades. The silence deepens, becomes almost tangible. It presses against the walls, against her chest, until all that remains is breath, heartbeat, and the soft murmur of the fire. A curious note from an old chronicle says, "When snow falls, all things return to first sleep." She feels the truth of it now. The stillness, the slowness, the faint sense of rebirth hidden within stillness. Outside, the white world swallows time. Inside, warmth holds its fragile vigil, and the princess, caught between the two, surrenders to the calm. She breathes in, slow and deep, tasting air that smells of smoke and cold iron, and exhales a prayer not of words, but of quiet gratitude, for fire, for breath, for the miracle of a world so cold and yet so endlessly alive. As the afternoon fades, the castle shifts once more into its slow heartbeat of routine. The snow has quieted to a fine dust, barely visible against the pale horizon. A pale, watery sunlight rests upon the battlements for a few fleeting moments before retreating again behind a curtain of grey. In this narrow window between day and dusk, the princess prepares for what the household calls the warming hour. It's the time of day when fires are replenished, rooms are sealed tight, and the castle braces for nightfall. You can almost feel it, a collective exhale, as servants hurry through the corridors, their footsteps soft and urgent, carrying bundles of kindling and buckets of coal. The princess watches from her chamber as the rhythm unfolds like a daily prayer. Contemporary records from castle inventories reveal that firewood was among the most closely guarded resources in winter. Every log had to be accounted for, each piece measured, cut, and rationed. "A careless blaze," one steward wrote, "is a sin against the household." In these great stone fortresses, warmth was not merely comfort, it was currency. A delightful curiosity from a 14th century expense ledger notes that certain nobles employed professional wood counters, whose sole duty was to ensure that no servant stole a log or slipped extra fuel to a friend. The value of heat, after all, was not abstract. It was as precious as silver. The princess knows this too well. Though her fire burns steadily, she has seen the storerooms half-empty barrels of charcoal, the neat stacks of wood diminishing week by week. Each flame in her hearth carries a cost that stretches down the chain of labor, through foresters, porters, and cart drivers shivering in frozen forests. It's generally accepted among economic historians that winter transformed even the wealthiest households into economies of survival. Castles functioned like small cities, every ember, every candle, every breath measured and rationed. To stay warm was to stay alive, and to waste heat was nearly a moral failing. An unusual detail preserved in an English steward's manual instructs noble women to monitor their own chamber's fuel use, lest warmth grow prideful. It wasn't mere thrift, it was virtue. To burn wisely was to rule wisely. You can imagine the princess glancing at her dwindling pile of logs, half practical, half philosophical, wondering whether her comfort deserves such devotion. Her maid enters now, bowing low, her arms burdened with split oak. The scent fills the chamber, instantly sharp, clean, alive. The princess gestures toward the hearth, and the maid kneels to feed the flames. Sparks leap, crackling like laughter in the still air. A charming superstition recorded in peasant lore claimed that if a log split cleanly in one stroke, good luck would follow through the week. The maid, perhaps remembering this, smiles faintly as the wood catches perfectly. The princess notices and allows herself a small smile in return. Experts remain divided on how conscious medieval people were of environmental cycles, but it's clear they respected wood as something sacred. Many regions enforced strict felling days and forbade cutting trees in deep winter, believing the forest itself slept then and must not be disturbed. Fire, therefore, was not simply resource, it was inheritance drawn from sleeping roots. A peculiar practice, described in a 15th century German household guide, involved blessing the wood before it entered the hearth. Servants sprinkled a pinch of salt and whispered, "Wake kindly." The act was both gratitude and apology. Though her castle sits miles away and centuries removed, the princess feels a similar reverence as the flames strengthen before her eyes. The maid steps back, wiping her hands on her apron, and the warmth spreads instantly. The air seems to breathe again. The shadows recede from the walls. A faint sheen of moisture melts along the window's edge. For a moment, the princess feels as though the castle itself sighs in relief. Some scholars of domestic life point out that this daily renewal of fire shaped more than survival, it shaped community. Every evening, as families and servants gathered around their respective hearths, they recreated the same gesture: light rekindled against darkness, warmth defended against the night. It was civilization reborn every sunset. An amusing fragment from a noble's diary recounts how children were taught to bow to the first flame of the evening, as one would to a guest. For in the fire's face, the writer mused, we see our own endurance. The princess, though long past childhood, bows slightly now as the fire roars to life, an instinctive acknowledgement of something ancient and shared. She extends her hands toward the blaze, palms open. The heat sinks into her skin, seeping through her bones. It's an intimate sensation, almost like touch. For all her rank and ritual, she feels in that moment no different from the simplest peasant huddled by a hearth. The fire makes equals of them all. Researchers have long suggested that this evening ritual, refueling, sealing windows, drawing curtains, was the most communal hour in a medieval household. Even royalty paused to watch the flames. It was the one time of day when survival, comfort, and beauty were the same thing. The maid finishes her task, bows once more, and withdraws quietly. The chamber grows still again, but the silence feels warmer now, alive with the low hum of burning wood. The firelight dances across the walls, tracing the embroidered figures on the tapestries, making them seem to move a flicker of life in woven stillness. The princess lingers in the glow, feeling her thoughts slow with the rhythm of the flames. The logs pop softly, a small, contented applause from the heart of the fire. She lets herself breathe in time with it. Outside, the wind begins to rise again, brushing against the shutters, searching for a way in. But inside, the warmth holds its ground. The castle, reborn through flame once more, glows like a living thing. And for a fleeting instant, as she watches the fire settle into steady light, the princess feels a rare certainty that survival, for all its cost and care, can still be beautiful. The fire burns low but steady, casting its gentle rhythm across the walls. It is late afternoon now, the hour when light begins to soften and the castle's quiet deepens. The air smells of oak, wool, and faintly of beeswax, a scent that clings to the breath of every stone. The princess sits at her writing table, quill in hand, the faint scratching of ink the only sound within the room. Letters, always letters. Winter fills the castle with them. Messages from distant courts, from family, from those who seek favor or forgiveness. The cold slows travel, but never stops the flow of parchment. Each seal broken releases not only words but a breath of another world. Records from royal households tell us that correspondence was a lifeline for the secluded nobility of winter. Snow could trap even a princess for months within the same walls, and words became her only passage outward. Couriers braved wind and wolves, carrying folded warmth from one lonely hearth to another. An unexpected tidbit from a French scribe's account reveals that ink itself behaved differently in winter, thickening from the chill, forcing writers to hold the bottle close to the fire so it stayed fluid. You can almost see her now, gently swirling the small glass vial, watching the ink swirl like dark smoke. Some historians argue that these long months of isolation nurtured the refinement of letter writing into an art form. In silence and solitude, noble women's words became both shield and song, love, longing, and diplomacy bound together in elegant phrases. The princess's quill glides with care, each stroke deliberate, her script both graceful and cautious. A delightful curiosity from the archives of Burgundy notes that royal women sometimes perfumed their letters, tiny drops of lavender or rose oil pressed into the wax seal so the scent would survive the journey. The princess does the same, dabbing her handkerchief lightly before sealing the parchment. The fragrance is faint but distinct, comfort that can travel miles through snow. Experts remain divided on whether these scented gestures were acts of affection or subtle politics tokens that reminded distant allies of one's refinement, one's presence. Either way, the message was the same: warmth, even in absence. The princess pauses, glancing toward the window. Outside, twilight gathers. The snow reflects the fading light, making the world appear illuminated from below, as if the earth itself were glowing. She takes a sip of mulled wine and returns to her writing, her fingers stiff but precise. "Dearest sister," she writes, "the snow has silenced the world again, yet within it I find peace. The fire hums, and I am reminded that even silence can be companionable." A peculiar note from medieval letter manuals advised that writers begin with health and weather before turning to affairs of heart or state. The practice wasn't mere etiquette, it was empathy. The shared struggle against the cold became a language in itself. You can feel it in her words, the understanding that to speak of warmth is to remind the listener of their own. Researchers widely agree that letter writing in winter became an emotional ritual, a way to externalize thoughts that could not safely be spoken aloud within the listening walls of a castle. The act of putting ink to parchment was its own form of prayer, a slow confession offered to distance. A charming superstition recorded in household notes suggested that if a letter was written too close to the hearth, its words might melt before reaching their reader. The princess smiles faintly at the thought and moves her chair a little away from the flames. The old beliefs still live quietly in her habits. It's generally accepted among literary historians that these letters, written in solitude, shaped how generations understood intimacy. When touch and travel were scarce, words became the bridge between hearts. The princess's tone, gentle, reflective, touched with longing, belongs to that lineage of warmth carried through ink. An endearing fragment from a noblewoman's correspondence in 1421 reads, "Each word I write sits near the fire before it departs, so that it may arrive to you still warm." The princess copies a similar sentiment at the end of her letter, not out of imitation, but because it feels true. The quill trembles slightly as she writes, "May these words reach you before the next frost does." She seals the parchment carefully, pressing her ring into the softened wax. The emblem of her house, an intricate knot of roses, emerges beneath her touch. The faint scent of lavender mingles with the fire's breath. When she lifts the letter, the seal catches the light like a small ember frozen in wax. A peculiar scholarly debate persists over whether these gestures, perfume, seal, flourish, were conscious artistry or simply instinct. But perhaps it doesn't matter. To write in the cold, to make beauty from endurance, is artistry enough. The maid enters quietly to collect the finished letters. She curtsies, glances at the seals, and smiles faintly before disappearing down the corridor. The princess watches her go, then exhales a soft sound, almost a sigh. The ink dries beside her, glinting faintly in the last light of day. She leans back in her chair, flexing her cramped fingers. The air hums gently, half warm, half cold, a balance between stillness and motion. The fire crackles once more, as though acknowledging her small labor. Archaeological evidence from preserved correspondence suggests that many such letters were never sent, their writers keeping them tucked away as private companions during lonely months. Perhaps the princess has her own hidden bundle, words written not to be read, but to be remembered. The light fades completely now, leaving only the glow of the fire. The room feels smaller, yet somehow more alive. The princess closes her eyes, the scent of lavender and smoke mingling in her mind. Her letter lies cooling on the table, its warmth carried away into history, its quiet hope sealed within. And for a moment, as the flames whisper their approval, she feels less alone. Dusk deepens quickly in winter. The light that remains clings to the edges of things, the rim of the goblet on her desk, the gleam of a brass latch, the fine threads of gold embroidered along the curtain seams. The world beyond her window fades into mist, its snowdrifts blurring into one vast field of shadow and light. The castle, so loud by day, quiets into its evening rhythm. The sound of bells drifts faintly through the corridors. Vespers. The princess stands, smoothing the folds of her gown. The weight of fabric feels heavier at this hour, as if the night itself settles into her clothing. Her maid enters silently, carrying a small brass lamp whose light trembles in the draught. The flame shivers but does not die. Records from convent life in the Middle Ages show that evening prayers vespers marked not just a religious obligation, but a psychological boundary. Day gave way to night. Work yielded to reflection. Even in royal households, the rhythm of the monastery shaped the rhythm of survival. A delightful curiosity from the household of Queen Philippa describes how noble women often kept their own chapels within chambers, small altars draped with linen, candles, and images of saints. The princess turns now toward her own, a narrow table beneath the window, its white cloth edged with lace, a silver cross gleaming faintly in the lamplight. She kneels before it, her breath visible in the chill air. The cold of the flagstone seeps through the fabric of her gown, grounding her. "Grant us rest from cold and fear," she whispers. Her words are not recited from rote, but formed from habit, shaped by centuries of winter and need. Scholars of medieval devotion often note that prayer served a physical as much as spiritual function. It slowed the heartbeat, deepened the breath, drew the body inward. In a freezing chamber, stillness could become its own form of warmth. A lesser-known curiosity from monastic manuals reveals that women were advised to pray slowly in winter so that each word may rise like smoke to heaven. You can almost see it now, the princess's lips moving softly, her words mingling with the faint curls of her breath, ascending invisibly in the dim light. Some historians still argue whether such personal piety was true faith or an expression of confinement. Was prayer comfort, or was it the only freedom she possessed? The princess does not ask such questions. Her world allows for no distinction. Faith, warmth, and endurance are all the same kind of prayer. She reaches for the small candle on her altar and cups her hands around the flame. It wavers in the draught, painting her palms gold. The warmth of that single light feels disproportionate to its size, fragile, yet infinite. For centuries, people have prayed to such fires, and perhaps it is not only God who listens, but the flame itself. An amusing fragment from a priest's winter sermon advises, "When you kneel in cold, do not curse the frost. Thank it, for it teaches the soul to move toward heat." The princess, remembering something like that from her childhood lessons, smiles faintly. The frost, she thinks, has taught her patience, and patience, in its way, has become grace. Researchers widely agree that domestic devotion during cold months transformed the atmosphere of castles into something half sacred. Rooms became chapels, light became scripture. The repetition of prayer, morning, noon, and night, created a rhythm that bound people to the turning of time, even when the sun refused to shine. She lifts her gaze to the silver cross. Its surface catches the lamplight, casting a faint reflection onto the wall, a trembling line of light, like a heartbeat. She breathes deeply, her shoulders loosening. Behind her, the fire hums softly, keeping vigil. A peculiar superstition whispered among attendants claimed that prayers offered near firelight were answered more swiftly. Heat, they said, pleased the saints. Perhaps that's why she prays where she does, between hearth and altar, between visible and invisible warmth. It's generally accepted among historians of medieval spirituality that religion offered structure to endurance. Where the cold threatened to dissolve time, prayer rebuilt it, marking hours, binding hearts, giving meaning to waiting. The princess, though weary, feels that truth settling within her now. She finishes her prayer, tracing the sign of the cross over her chest. The gesture is slow, unhurried, a ritual more of reassurance than petition. When she rises, the lamp flame trembles again in the draught. Her maid moves forward instinctively, shielding it with her palm. The sight, two women guarding a tiny light against the night, feels older than the castle itself. A charming little custom mentioned in household writings of the period notes that when evening lamps were lit, servants whispered a blessing, light and love to the house. The princess hears her maid murmur something similar, so quietly it's almost lost beneath the fire's hiss. She feels an unexpected tenderness in that sound, a human warmth, untouched by hierarchy. As she returns to her seat by the hearth, the room feels changed. The cold is still there, but it has softened. The silence is no longer emptiness, but peace. The flames rise higher now, fed by fresh logs, and their glow mingles with the soft gold of the altar lamp. Outside, the last light fades entirely. The snow no longer falls, it glows, reflecting the firelight that escapes through the narrow cracks of the window shutters. The world has become a mirror of her chamber, dark, quiet, flickering with fragile radiance. She exhales slowly, the breath barely visible now, and whispers one final phrase before the night fully arrives: "Let this warmth endure." And though she cannot see it, her words ripple outward into the frozen air, part prayer, part promise, lingering like the memory of heat long after the fire has gone to sleep. The night has fully claimed the world beyond her walls. The castle, now swathed in quiet shadow, feels suspended in time, an island of flickering light adrift in a sea of frost. The fire in the princess's chamber burns low again, its embers glowing like watchful eyes beneath the grate. The faint smell of wood and wax fills the air, mingled with the sweetness of wool and perfume. She sits by the hearth, the same place where the day began, though the light now is gentler, almost intimate. The rhythm of the castle has slowed to a whisper. Somewhere in the lower halls, the last servants murmur their good nights. A door closes, a draught sighs through the corridor, and then stillness. Researchers widely agree that medieval nights were longer in every sense of the word. Without clocks to segment the darkness, time expanded, softening into ritual and imagination. The hours between supper and sleep became a space for storytelling, prayer, and quiet endurance. For the princess, it is a time to listen to the fire, to the wind, and to the strange, familiar music of solitude. A charming curiosity from a 14th century household manual describes the tradition of tale hour. Before sleep, nobles and their attendants gathered near the hearth to exchange stories. These weren't always legends of saints or heroes, often they were small, domestic tales. A cook's dream, a guard's superstition, a memory from childhood. Warmth, in such moments, came not from flame alone but from voice. The princess remembers those evenings from her youth, sitting at her mother's knee while old maids spun stories of far-off lands and winter miracles. "Speak softly," they'd whisper, "or the night will listen." She can still hear the cadence of those voices, slow, measured, lilting like the swing of a pendulum. Some scholars debate whether these nightly stories served as mere entertainment or subtle instruction. In a time when books were rare, and reading rarer still, storytelling was both art and education. Through tales, wisdom survived lessons about generosity, courage, patience, and the fragility of human warmth. The princess shifts closer to the fire and closes her eyes. In the crackle of the wood, she hears echoes of those long-ago nights. One log snaps, and for a moment it sounds like laughter. Another sighs and falls inward, whispering like a familiar voice. She smiles faintly, knowing it is only air, but the comfort remains. A lesser-known custom among noble households described that listeners often held hands during story hour to keep the warmth from escaping. It was not romance but ritual, a shared acknowledgement that cold could steal into the plasterings, spirit as easily as into the flesh. Though the princess sits alone now, she rests her palms together, feeling her own pulse as a faint reminder of company. It's generally accepted among cultural historians that winter storytelling bound communities together more effectively than any decree or feast. Words carried heat, rhythm soothed fear. In an age without lamplight or noise, narrative was the hearth of the mind. An amusing little anecdote from a nun's diary records that one of her sisters refused to sleep without a bedtime story, claiming it lulled the devil out of her thoughts. The princess laughs softly at that image, the sound startling even to her own ears. It feels good to hear herself again, to know that warmth can still live in laughter. She leans forward, poking at the embers with an iron rod. Sparks scatter briefly, twinkling like fireflies before vanishing into the dark. The act itself feels ancient, ceremonial, a quiet conversation with the flame. Archaeological evidence from preserved hearths shows that people often arrange stones in circular patterns around fires, not for utility, but for focus. The flickering center became a mirror for the self. You can see that in the princess now, her gaze fixed, her thoughts turning inward. An unexpected letter from a court musician recounts that royal households sometimes ended their nights with soft singing a lullaby not for children, but for the fire. To send it gently to sleep, he wrote. Some hummed, some whispered prayers. The princess hums now, low and tuneless, more breath than melody. The sound drifts through the room like smoke. Some specialists in medieval psychology suggest that these acts, humming, praying, speaking to flames, were not superstition but survival. In a world of isolation and cold, people gave the night a voice so it wouldn't swallow theirs. To personify the dark was to tame it. The princess draws the fur closer around her shoulders. Her fingers, though warm, tremble faintly from fatigue. She lets her head rest against the chair, eyes half closed, body sinking into the steady rhythm of crackling wood. The light flickers across her face, painting it with gold, shadow, and peace. A peculiar superstition among castle servants held that if one stayed silent long enough before sleep, one could hear the fire's final sigh, a soft, "Thank you for being fed." The princess listens, smiling at the thought. The flame shifts, settling deeper into the hearth as though responding. Historians still debate whether the medieval sense of companionship with the elements, fire, wind, and even snow, was faith, poetry, or necessity. Perhaps it was all three. When the nights were long and gods seemed distant, the world itself became divine. The fire burns lower, the shadows grow taller. She watches the last flame twist into a slow dance, its movements hypnotic. Time, again, loses meaning. Only warmth remains, the faint, golden thread that binds her to this place, to every winter before and after. And in that stillness, she feels it again, the same realization that has carried her through every night of this long season. The fire is not only in the wood or the walls, it is in her breath, her voice, her endurance. Outside, the wind sighs through the battlements like a weary giant. Inside, she hums one last line of her childhood song. The note fades into silence, and for a long, beautiful moment, there is nothing but the warmth of memory holding back the dark. The fire's glow has dimmed to a low, patient heartbeat in the dark. The chamber seems to float within its own pocket of time, silent, golden, and self-contained. The princess sits very still, her eyes half-lidded, her mind balanced delicately between wakefulness and sleep. Beyond the window, the storm has returned. The wind groans against the stone as though trying to reclaim it, to remind the castle that all warmth is borrowed. The candles have burned low too, their wax pools at the base, catching the faint shimmer of reflected flame. The light they cast is soft and unsteady, but somehow more beautiful for it, like kindness that persists even when tired. The princess leans forward, shielding one candle from the draught, her hand cupped like a small shelter. Contemporary chronicles reveal that medieval households treated this hour before true sleep as sacred, though few would have used that word. It was the moment when the body gave itself back to stillness, when noise ceased and thought became its own quiet landscape. A lesser-known practice recorded in the diaries of noble women describes the ritual of turning the bed, the careful smoothing of sheets, the fluffing of pillows, and the quiet tucking of fur layers. The task was partly comfort, partly meditation. To arrange one's resting place was to assert control over the chaos of the cold. The princess rises and moves toward her bed. Her bare feet touch the rushes with a soft, dry whisper. She draws the curtains slightly, adjusting the folds so they fall evenly. The movement feels both practical and ceremonial. The tapestries on the walls seem to breathe with the draught, their woven figures flickering in and out of shadow. An endearing fragment of a domestic guide from the early 15th century advises noble women to speak kind words to their bed, for it shall keep their heart warm until the dawn. The princess smiles faintly at the absurd sweetness of it, but she whispers a few words nonetheless. The habit, like prayer, is half belief, half poetry. Experts remain divided on how seriously medieval people took such bedtime rituals. Some dismiss them as superstition. Others see them as early mindfulness, an instinctive act of gratitude toward comfort. 1. The princess understands it differently. To her, each gesture is both remembrance and resilience, a promise that warmth still belongs to her, even in the longest night. She sits on the edge of the mattress. The fur blanket rises like a mountain of softness, its weight promising safety. Her maid approaches quietly with a small copper pan filled with glowing coals. Steam curls from the metal where drops of water hiss and vanish. The maid slides it gently under the sheets, letting the heat seep upward. The smell of iron and ash fills the air for a moment, before fading. Archaeological discoveries have unearthed remnants of such warming pans, their handles etched with symbols, crosses, stars, even small animals. Some scholars believe they serve not only as tools but as charms, each design a whispered plea for peaceful sleep. The princess traces one such pattern with her finger, feeling the raised grooves beneath her touch. A curious superstition recorded in household folklore claims that one must never lie directly on a freshly warmed bed, lest the heat chase the soul from the body. Servants waited a few minutes after removing the pan before their mistress entered. The princess observes the same pause now, her eyes fixed on the faint steam curling from the furs. It's generally accepted among historians of daily life that the process of preparing a bed in winter was almost communal. It required coordination, maids bringing the coals, attendants shaking out furs, sometimes a guard stationed nearby to ensure no spark caught in the drapery. Warmth, once again, was a group effort disguised as luxury. A delightful oddity mentioned in the correspondence of a Scottish lady tells of noblewomen who slipped small sprigs of juniper or thyme between their sheets to sweeten the air. The princess's maid does the same, pressing one fragrant stem into the folds of linen. The scent blooms softly, a green, earthy whisper beneath the richer smells of smoke and wool. Some researchers in medieval domestic customs suggest that such scents played more than aesthetic roles. Many herbs were mildly antiseptic, others calming. Sleep, for those who had the means to cultivate it, was something of an art constructed carefully, layer upon layer, like the castle itself. The maid curtsies and steps back, her face dappled in firelight. "Will your grace need anything more?" she asks softly. The princess shakes her head. "No, only quiet." The maid bows once more, then extinguishes two of the candles and slips from the room. The silence that follows feels alive. The princess moves slowly, drawing the curtains around her bed until she is cocooned in darkness. Inside this small world of cloth and warmth, sound becomes muted, and even the cold feels distant. She exhales, sinking into the weight of furs, her body adjusting to the bed's deep embrace. Historians still debate how well insulated these royal beds truly were. Some argue that layers of linen and fur created microclimates warm enough to mimic summer. Others insist that no amount of fabric could truly conquer stone's chill. Perhaps both are true. Comfort here is relative, defined as much by gratitude as by heat. A lesser-known quirk from noble life claims that some women left one curtain slightly open to let the soul wander in dreams. The princess has always liked that idea. She leaves a small gap in her canopy, through which the faintest shimmer of firelight seeps a promise that she is safe, but not sealed away. She lies still, eyes open, listening to the castle's slow respiration. The beams creak, the wind hums, and beneath it all, the hearth murmurs like a sleeping companion. Each sound is familiar, part of the same lullaby the castle has sung since its stones were set. A letter from a 15th century lady describes this exact moment. When all is quiet and the night stands guard, I feel my walls breathe. The princess would understand that completely. Within her woven cocoon, she too feels the living pulse of her fortress, its loyalty, its silence, its endurance. The last candle flickers once, then fades. Darkness folds over her, deep and heavy but not cruel. The warmth beneath her skin holds steady, and as her eyes close, her mind drifts toward dreams softer than snow. Outside, the wind prowls, but it cannot reach her here. Inside, the fire hums like a heart that will not sleep. And the princess, wrapped in layers of fur and faith, finally exhales into stillness. Sleep comes slowly. It drifts in the way snow falls, quiet, uneven, almost shy. The princess lies in her bed, surrounded by darkness that hums faintly with warmth. The fire outside the canopy has dimmed to embers, but its memory glows red against the curtains, a faint heartbeat at the edge of her world. She is neither fully awake nor truly asleep, floating somewhere between thought and surrender. Medieval people often describe this half-waking state as the soul's wandering. In surviving writings by mystics and scholars alike, it was believed that the spirit slipped gently from the body before sleep, hovering close like a moth near flame. Dreams, they said, were the echoes of its travels. A curious record from a 14th century abbess describes her nightly fear that her soul would lose its way in the cold and fail to return by dawn. Her sisters assured her that as long as a fire burned near her bed, it would guide the spirit home. The princess, perhaps unknowingly, observes the same comfort. The soft ember light beyond her curtain is her tether. She exhales deeply, her breath invisible in the darkness. The air inside the bed feels dense with warmth now, fragrant with thyme and fir. Beneath her fingertips, the fabric is smooth, the texture of spun linen cool against her skin. She shifts slightly, feeling the subtle rhythm of her pulse in her neck, matching the faint crackle of the hearth. Some historians of medieval sleep note that rest was rarely continuous. People slept in two parts. The first sleep, deep and dream-heavy, and the second sleep, lighter, closer to dawn. Between the two lay an hour or more of wakeful, calm time for reflection, quiet prayer, or whispered conversation. The princess seems to know this instinctively. She drifts but does not dive, letting the first layer of sleep settle like snow before she stirs again. An unexpected entry in a 15th century physician's notes describes how noble patients were advised to wake gently midway through the night, lest the humours grow sluggish. The logic was bodily, but the effect was spiritual. The night divided itself, allowing thought to breathe. The princess opens her eyes in the dark. Her surroundings are vague shapes, soft folds, faint glows. Somewhere in the corridor, a guard's steps echo distantly, steady as a heartbeat. The sound comforts her. In a world of uncertainty, rhythm means life. A peculiar superstition from northern households held that one should speak a single word aloud during this wakeful hour to ward off nightmares. Say truth or mercy, the saying went, and the dark will pass you by. The princess whispers softly into the blackness. Mercy. The syllable lingers like a sigh, neither command nor plea. It's generally accepted among cultural historians that such small nighttime rituals gave structure to the formlessness of darkness. Where clocks and lanterns were absent, people invented their own constellations, acts of reassurance, to chart their course through sleep. The princess listens to the wind pressing against her windows, the faint whine of it slipping through gaps in the stone. Each gust sounds like a voice too ancient to decipher. For a moment, she imagines it speaking to her, Not in words, but in rhythm. The world outside is cold, yes, but not dead. It moves, breathes, mourns, sings. An endearing little anecdote in a troubadour's diary recalls how knights on watch believed that the wind carried prayers from sleeping souls. Every gust is someone dreaming, he wrote. The princess smiles faintly in the dark, liking the notion that her own half-dreams might travel the night like birds. She turns onto her side, the furs rustling softly. Beneath her pillow, the warming stone from earlier still holds a faint residue of heat, like a heartbeat pressed into the earth itself. Her fingers rest there for a moment, absorbing it. Archaeological traces of these stones show that many were smoothed by years of use, their edges polished by countless hands. Some were carved with initials or simple prayers. They were, in their way, more personal than jewels, tokens of survival passed quietly through generations. The princess wonders who first held hers, and whether they too found comfort in its warmth at midnight. Some scholars still argue whether these layered gestures, candles, herbs, stones, were acts of faith or desperation, but perhaps both truths intertwine. In a castle that breathes cold through every seam, survival is not brute endurance but ritualized tenderness. A curious bit of folklore warns that to dream of fire meant passion, but to dream of ashes meant regret. The princess thinks of that now, watching the embers' faint light flicker through the small gap in her bed curtains. There's something almost human in the fire's persistence. It refuses extinction, even when quiet. Researchers of medieval sleep culture note that this quiet, wakeful phase was often when people thought their most intimate thoughts reflections not fit for daylight. The princess's mind wanders there now, to her sister's laughter, to the smell of rain in warmer months, to the memory of a summer morning when she once believed she would never know cold again. The recollection stirs something tender within her chest, like a small bird moving beneath cloth. A letter from an Italian countess once described this same nocturnal drifting. In the dark, memory grows warm and gentle, and I feel all times at once. The princess understands that perfectly. In the hush between sleeps, time ceases to be a line and becomes a circle past and present folding into one steady heartbeat. The fire pops once, softly, a reminder of the world's persistence. The sound is comforting, like an answer to a question she didn't know she'd asked. Some experts in medieval psychology suggest that the castle's long winters nurtured a peculiar intimacy between isolation and imagination. When external warmth waned, the mind became its own hearth. The princess, half dreaming, feels that truth deeply. Her thoughts flicker like the coals, small, bright, refusing silence. Outside, the wind softens. The castle exhales. She closes her eyes again, her breathing slow, even, and sure. This time sleep comes without hesitation, like a blanket drawing itself gently over her thoughts. And as the night deepens into perfect quiet, the last ember beyond her curtain fades to a single red eye, watchful, steadfast, alive. When she wakes, it is not to light but to sound a faint creak in the timbers above, the subtle shifting of stone that means the castle is greeting another morning. The fire has burned down to a grey bed of ash, but the warmth lingers, trapped beneath the heavy curtains of her bed. Her body feels loose and heavy, her thoughts still wandering through the fog of dreams. This is the second sleep's quiet conclusion, the soft ascent back into the waking world. Medieval writers called it the returning hour, believing that the soul, after its nightly wanderings, rejoined the body in those first breaths before dawn. The princess stretches, slow and careful, feeling the furs slide against her skin. The air beyond the curtains bites with cold, but she is reluctant to leave her little world of warmth just yet. Some historians of medieval life point out that the transition between sleeping and waking was treated with care. To wake too quickly, they warned, could disturb the humours or confuse the mind. Rise gently, advised a 13th century medical treatise, lest the soul stumble in its return. You can almost picture the princess following that advice. Her movements slow, reverent, more ritual than routine. She opens the curtain just enough to see the faint grey light seeping through the shutters. The fire's ashes glow with faint life beneath their surface, and for a moment she wonders if she should stir them, feed them, or let them rest. There's a strange tenderness in that choice, like deciding whether to wake a sleeping friend. A curious superstition found in rural household records claims that if one could reignite the previous night's embers without new wood, it promised good luck for the day ahead. The princess smiles faintly at the memory her nurse used to do exactly that, blowing softly on the coals until one spark flared, and whispering, "See, the sun remembers us." She leans forward now, pulls her shawl close, and does the same. Her breath touches the ashes. For a moment, nothing happens. Then a tiny flame curls upward, golden and fragile. She feels a spark of pride, as though she's performed a small act of magic. Experts often debate whether medieval people saw fire as divine or domestic. To some, it was purely practical, a tool. To others, it was presence, a living thing that demanded respect. For the princess, it is both. The fire is her companion and her proof that night can always end. The maid enters quietly, carrying a tray of warm water and bread. She curtsies low, her breath visible in the air. "The storm's eased, my lady," she whispers. "The courtyard's white as heaven." The princess nods, though she cannot yet summon words. Her voice still belongs to sleep. Archaeological evidence from castles across Europe reveals traces of routine like this: small water basins near the bed, not for bathing but for morning cleansing. The ritual was simple. Dip the fingers, touch the face, greet the day. The princess does exactly that. The water is shockingly cold, and she gasps, her whole body waking at once. The sensation is sharp but cleansing, a reminder that life must resume its rhythm. A delightful note from a chambermaid's diary mentions how noble women often murmured a blessing when they first touched cold water in winter. "May my heart stay warm while my hands grow brave." The princess whispers it now, smiling at the old memory. The words rise into the still air like steam. Some scholars argue that these simple gestures, touching water, lighting a fire, gave meaning to repetition. In a world without modern noise or distraction, routine was poetry, structure woven into survival. The princess feels that truth in her bones. The morning unfolds not with haste but with intention. Her maid opens the shutters slightly, and light spills across the room, soft and silvery. The snow outside gleams like a field of crushed pearls. The reflection brightens everything: the bed, the walls, even the dull metal of the candle holders. For a moment, the room feels larger, lighter, almost forgiving. A peculiar observation from travelers' journals describes how winter sunlight in castles was often magnified by mirrors or bowls of polished brass, arranged to catch the faintest gleam. The princess's own mirror, oval and framed in carved wood, stands by the window. The light bends across it, scattering faint gold onto the stone floor. She rises slowly, wrapping herself in her robe. The floor's chill bites through her slippers, but it also wakes her fully, pulling her back into the living world. She crosses to the window, resting her hands on the cold sill. Outside, the snow lies unbroken. The air shimmers faintly, and from somewhere far below she can hear the sound of shovels striking stone, the world beginning its day. A curious little custom found in winter chronicles claims that stepping into sunlight before breakfast brought good fortune, even if the light was weak. The princess unlatches the shutter and opens it wider. The cold rushes in, sharp and invigorating. Her breath spills out into the world, turning instantly to silver mist. She inhales deeply. The air tastes of snow, wood smoke, and faint iron. The freshness cuts through every drowsy remnant of sleep. It's not comfort, exactly, but it feels honest, a reminder that warmth is earned each day anew. It's generally accepted among historians of medieval domestic life that dawn was the quietest hour in the castle. the time before business, before voices, before the machinery of duty resumed. It belonged, for a few brief moments, to the self. The princess treasures that. She watches the courtyard fill slowly with light. Servants emerge, their figures small against the vast whiteness. The sound of their shovels and laughter rises faintly through the air. Somewhere, a stable door creaks, and a horse snorts, the sound sharp as music in the stillness. A passage from a chronicler of court life describes this same sensation. At dawn, even queens remember they are mortal. The princess feels that in her chest now, a quiet humility that carries no sadness, only truth. She turns back to the hearth, where the rekindled fire now burns brighter, a small sun reborn from ashes. She holds her hands out toward it, feeling the warmth creep up her arms, slow but steady. For a moment, she stands suspended between night and day, dream and duty, warmth and cold. Then she smiles, a calm, private smile, meant for no one but herself. The day has begun, and the castle, like her, breathes again. The day rises pale and quiet, the snow outside glowing faintly in the tender light of morning. The castle stirs awake, not suddenly, but gently, as though reluctant to break the fragile peace that winter has wrapped around it. Voices echo faintly through the corridors, muffled and rhythmic, like the murmuring of the sea beneath ice. The princess stands near the window, her hands resting lightly on the sill. The frost has etched delicate lacework across the glass, a pattern of flowers that nature has drawn in silence. She studies it for a while, tracing the shapes with her gaze. Beyond it, the world is white and endless. The storm has stilled, and now everything lies under its new skin of snow, smooth, unbroken, and beautiful. The servants move through the courtyard below, their breath silver in the air. She can hear the clink of buckets, the scrape of wooden sleds hauling logs, the faint rhythmic sound of brooms sweeping frost from stone steps. All around her, life resumes its quiet, purposeful motion. It's generally accepted among historians of medieval daily life that after long winter nights, mornings in castles carried a sense of ceremony. The rekindling of fire, the first meal, the lifting of shutters, these were acts of renewal as meaningful as any prayer. In a world ruled by cold and darkness, every dawn was a triumph. The princess steps back from the window and gazes around her chamber. The room feels lighter now. The fire burns brighter, no longer a fragile ember but a confident glow. Its warmth has softened the air. The chill that once clung to the stones has retreated to the corners. The scent of wood smoke mingles with lavender and thyme, a domestic symphony of survival. A curious note from a 14th century lady's journal describes how she greeted each winter morning with a single whispered line: "The fire wakes, so do I." The princess murmurs it now under her breath, finding comfort in its rhythm. Her maid enters quietly, arms full of fresh linens and wool. "The sun's out, my lady," she says with a smile. "The snow will shine all day." The princess nods. "Then let it," she replies softly. "We've earned a little light." The maid smiles again and begins her work, folding blankets, shaking out furs, laying out garments for the day. The movements are smooth, practiced ritual as much as routine. Each small action restores order, stitching the fabric of the day back together after the long unraveling of night. A charming fragment from the records of a northern manor tells how noble households greeted the season's first clear morning by spreading carpets near the hearth so the ladies might sit and feel the sun upon their faces. The princess follows this unspoken tradition now. She drags her chair closer to the window, where sunlight spills in like honey, pale and sweet. The warmth is faint, but real. She sits there quietly, eyes half closed. The fire crackles, the snow gleams, the world breathes. In this moment, the harshness of winter feels distant, almost forgiven. Some scholars of medieval psychology claim that people of the time viewed warmth not merely as temperature, but as virtue, a sign of inner grace. To be kind was to be warm. To be cruel was to be cold. Perhaps that's why fires were tended so reverently, why food was shared even when scarce, why prayers were whispered into the flames. Heat was the measure of humanity. The princess watches the light shifting across the floor, the colors of the stone changing as the sun climbs higher. She thinks of all the small acts that kept her alive through the long nights, the maids who fed the hearth, the cooks who stirred their stews beside the endless fire, the guards who walked their rounds through the snow. Warmth, she realizes, is never solitary. It is a chain of quiet labors linking one human breath to another. A peculiar superstition recorded in castle folklore claimed that when a winter finally ended, one should keep a single piece of unburned wood from the last fire. It was said to hold the soul of warmth and protect the household until spring. The princess rises now and chooses one small log from the basket, setting it aside near her altar. She smiles at the thought, not for superstition's sake, but for remembrance. Archaeological findings from castles that have stood for centuries reveal traces of such habits. Small, preserved remnants of hearths carefully left untouched, as if each family, across generations, had honored the same promise, never to forget the warmth that carried them through the cold. Outside, a crow lands on the windowsill, its feathers black against the white world. It tilts its head at her, unafraid. She studies it for a moment before it flutters away, leaving a faint trace of motion in the air. The moment feels like a message, simple, natural, ephemeral. It's often said by modern historians that life in medieval castles was defined by contrast between light and shadow, silence and song, warmth and chill. The princess has lived all those opposites through this long, frozen season. Now, in the gentle quiet of morning, she feels the truth of them blending, the cold teaching her to cherish heat, the darkness teaching her to love dawn. She lifts her cup of warmed wine, takes a slow sip, and closes her eyes. The taste is rich and spiced, the liquid tracing its warmth down her throat. Outside, the sunlight catches the snow until it glitters like 1,000 mirrors, each reflecting a fragment of her small fire. The world, she realizes, is full of warmth, some of it hidden, some of it borrowed, but always waiting to be found again. The maid finishes her work and curtsies. "Shall I fetch your cloak, my lady?" she asks. The princess shakes her head gently. "Not yet. Let the day come to me as it is." And so she sits there, motionless, bathed in pale gold and the soft hum of the fire, while the cold world beyond her walls begins to stir with life once more. For all its hardships, the winter has given her this, the understanding that warmth is not only what one feels, but what one keeps, what one gives, what one remembers. She breathes in deeply, the scent of smoke and sunlight mingling in the air, and for the first time in many nights, she feels no need to chase the cold away. It has taught her its lesson well, that endurance and beauty can share the same bed. Now, as the castle settles into its waking hours, she lets her thoughts drift like snowflakes melting in light. The fire murmurs, the morning brightens, and all things stone, breath, and memory seem to exhale together. And somewhere deep within the quiet warmth of that room you realize, so do you. And now, as the story softens into silence, let your own breath slow with the rhythm of the fire you've imagined. Picture it, the last ember glowing beneath the grate, its light pulsing gently in the dimness. The castle has settled into peace. The princess, her day complete, closes her eyes again, not in fatigue, but in quiet gratitude. Outside, the snow lies still. The air carries no sound but the distant hum of wind brushing against the towers. The world is calm now, folded under a blanket of white. Each flake, each spark, each faint breath of warmth seems to exist only for this moment. You too can rest here. The cold cannot reach you. The walls are strong. The hearth still glows. Feel the softness of fur beneath your fingers, the faint perfume of lavender in the air. Listen to the crackle fading into silence. the rhythm of your own breathing blending with the castle's deep, ancient calm. If thoughts wander, let them. The night is long enough for every dream. The warmth you've carried through this story belongs to you now. It will keep its vigil while you drift. And as the last image fades, the fire dimming, the snow whispering, the princess sleeping beneath her furs, let yourself surrender to the same stillness, the same quiet grace. Rest easy, traveller of time. The cold has passed. The world sleeps softly, and so may you. Sweet dreams.